What if the world underestimated you, only for the greatest mind of our generation to see your potential? Alex Carter had always been the kid no one noticed. Growing up in a small town in Northern California, where everyone knew everyone's business, he was the kid who blended in with the background. Not the athlete, not the troublemaker, just the kid who always had his nose in a book, a world full of questions behind his eyes, and a brain that seemed to work differently from everyone else. Most people didn't know that. They saw a kid with messy hair, worn-out sneakers, and a tendency to daydream in class. It wasn't that Alex didn't want to fit in. It's just that no one seemed to understand him. He wasn't into sports like the other kids. He didn't hang out in the mall or get excited about the next school dance. Instead, he found comfort in books and puzzles, in the hours he spent online trying to figure out how things worked, how rockets launched, how machines talked to each other, and how to make computers think for themselves. These were the things that sparked his curiosity, not the latest trending TikTok challenge. His family didn't get it either. His older sister, Katie, was the popular one, the one who had a full schedule of friends, dates, and school events. She was the one their parents talked about at the dinner table, congratulating her on her perfect grades and social life. Then there was Alex, sitting quietly, eating his vegetables, and pretending that being ignored didn't sting. "Alex, could you help me with this?" his mother asked one evening, her voice tinged with exhaustion after a long day at work. Alex glanced up from his laptop. "Sure, what's up?" "We need to talk about college. Katie's got a few options already. She's been looking at some places in California." Alex nodded, though he wasn't really listening. Katie had everything figured out. She was the one who had a path already laid out for her, one that didn't seem to require any real effort. Alex, on the other hand, had no idea where he was headed. His grades were good, great, even, but no one ever saw him as more than just a kid. Certainly, no one ever saw him as someone capable of doing something big. That was until the day Elon Musk came to town. It wasn't like anyone had been expecting it. There had been whispers for weeks, but no one really thought it would happen. Small towns don't get tech billionaires, right? But there he was. Elon Musk, in the flesh, driving through the narrow streets of Redwood Falls in his black Tesla. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day when nothing exciting was supposed to happen. Alex was sitting in his favorite spot in the library, his eyes glued to a coding problem that made most adults cringe. A knock on the door interrupted his focus. "Alex, you're needed in the town hall," the librarian said with a bemused smile. "Why?" Alex asked, barely looking up from the screen. "There's some bigwig in town," she said, her voice tinged with awe. "Elon Musk or something. They're holding a town meeting in case anyone wants to meet him." Alex raised an eyebrow. "Elon Musk?" "The one and only," she said, barely able to contain her excitement. Alex felt a mixture of confusion and indifference. Elon Musk was the CEO of Tesla and SpaceX, two companies Alex admired from a distance. But why would a man like that be interested in a town like Redwood Falls? He figured it was just another public relations stunt, a way for Musk to check in with the locals and pretend he cared about the small-town way of life. Still, it was hard not to be intrigued by the idea of meeting such a famous person. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad to show up, even if it was only for a few minutes. When Alex walked into the town hall, he was struck by how out of place he felt. The room was filled with local farmers, store owners, and retired teachers, everyone talking in hushed tones about the surprise visit. Elon Musk, who had once seemed like an untouchable figure from the headlines, stood at the front, his presence commanding the attention of the entire room. "Good afternoon, everyone," Musk said, his voice calm but firm. "I've been traveling across the country, looking for new talent, new ideas. I've heard some things about Redwood Falls, and I thought I'd stop by to see if there's anyone here who might have a vision for the future." The room fell silent. No one knew what to say. This wasn't the sort of event where someone would raise their hand to ask a question. But Alex wasn't like everyone else. He had always been the one who asked questions, the one who had something to say when no one else did. Without thinking, Alex stood up and made his way to the front. The eyes of the room followed him, and he could feel the weight of their collective judgment. "What do you mean by a vision for the future?" Alex asked. "Like, the future of electric cars, or the future of space travel? What exactly are you looking for?" Musk turned to face him, a flicker of interest crossing his face. "You're asking the right question. I'm looking for someone who thinks differently, someone who isn't afraid to challenge the status quo. Are you that person?" Alex didn't hesitate. "Maybe. I don't know. But I've always thought about what comes next, how we can do things better. Not just cars, or space, but how we think about everything. Energy, computers, education." There was a pause, and Alex immediately felt the weight of his own words. Had he just embarrassed himself in front of everyone? Was this how he was going to be remembered in this small town? As the awkward kid who didn't know when to stay quiet? But then Musk smiled. A small, knowing smile, as if he had seen something in Alex that no one else had. "I think you might be onto something," Musk said. "How would you like to be part of something bigger than you ever imagined?" Alex froze. Was this real? Was Elon Musk actually asking him to be part of his world? The crowd in the room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Alex's response. And for the first time in his life, Alex felt like he wasn't just another kid in the background. He was something more. Something Musk could see. And maybe, just maybe, this was the moment his life had been waiting for. "Yes," Alex said, his voice steady, "I'd like that." The room erupted in murmurs, but Alex couldn't hear any of it. His mind was racing, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. His moment. For the first time, Alex knew his life was about to change. And it was just beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Alex Carter had always felt like an outsider. In a town like Redwood Falls, where everyone knew everyone else's business, it was hard to be different. Small-town life had its charm, but it also had its limits. People like Alex didn't fit neatly into the usual molds of high school football star or popular cheerleader. Instead, he lived in his own world, a world where the answers to life's biggest questions could be found not in the halls of the local high school but in books, computer screens, and the deep corners of his own mind. At age 16, Alex had already mastered things most kids his age wouldn't even understand. While his friends were busy planning their next party or obsessing over the latest fashion trends, Alex was learning how to build simple robots from scratch. He would spend hours on end in the attic of his family's house, surrounded by old electronics, wires, and scraps of machinery. To anyone else, it looked like chaos. But to Alex, it was paradise. His fascination with technology had started as a child, when he first tore apart his dad's old radio to see what made it work. His dad had scolded him for it, telling him to leave his things alone, but Alex had been hooked. That was when he realized that the world wasn't just made of objects, it was made of systems, of puzzles waiting to be solved. And that was the key to everything. If you could understand the system, you could change it. You could create something new. But despite his brilliance in this area, Alex never felt like he belonged. In school, he was the kid who sat at the back of the class, listening to the teacher drone on while his mind wandered to bigger questions. Why did things break? What could be improved? What if the future didn't look like what people imagined, but something radically different? His classmates, on the other hand, saw him as the weird kid. The one who never joined in on the gossip or played the latest video games with the others. He wasn't bad at making friends, he just didn't want the same things they did. And that made him seem strange. He never cared much about the things that seemed to matter to them, dating, driving, and being seen at the right places with the right people. But it wasn't just his peers who didn't understand him. It was his family, too. Katie, his older sister, was everything Alex wasn't. She was the popular one in school, the girl everyone knew and wanted to be around. She was beautiful, confident, and had no problem making friends. At home, she would sit with their parents in the living room, chatting about her plans for the future, her latest high school drama, and her upcoming college applications. She was always the center of attention, the one who got the praise, the compliments, the validation. Then there was Alex, sitting in the corner, reading some book about artificial intelligence or coding, trying to figure out how to build a new app or develop a piece of software that could change the world. But when he tried to talk about his ideas with his family, it was like speaking a different language. His mom, Linda, was sweet but practical. She worked long hours at a local grocery store, barely making ends meet. She wanted Alex to follow a more traditional path, get good grades, go to college, get a job. She didn't have time to understand his dreams of revolutionizing technology, she just wanted him to be successful in the way everyone else defined success. His dad, James, wasn't around much. He had always been distant, lost in his own world of work and rarely available for heart-to-heart conversations. When Alex did try to engage him in discussions about technology or his future, his dad would nod, but his eyes would glaze over, like he wasn't really listening. His dad's idea of success was simple: work hard, keep your head down, and make enough money to provide for your family. Dreams were for other people, not for those who had to make ends meet. Katie, of course, had no patience for Alex's ambitions. She saw his passion for technology as nothing more than a phase. "It's great that you're into that stuff, Alex," she'd say with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "but you're going to have to figure out something more practical. You can't live your life in front of a screen. What about relationships? What about getting a job? You need to think about your future." Her words stung, but Alex had learned to ignore them. He didn't want the life his sister had chosen. He didn't want to follow the rules of normalcy. But in a town like Redwood Falls, it was hard to imagine how his dreams could ever become anything more than fantasy. His classmates didn't see him as capable of anything other than being a quiet, awkward genius, someone who would always be just the smart kid in the back of the room. His world felt small, and his dreams even smaller. But the ideas in his head kept growing, and the curiosity inside him burned hotter. He often found himself staring out the window of his room, wondering if he would ever have the chance to do something big. If the world would ever recognize him for what he was, someone who didn't just think differently but could change the world because of it. That was the life Alex had known before everything changed. It wasn't long after Elon Musk's visit to Redwood Falls that Alex's world would be turned upside down. What started as a casual encounter at a town meeting would become the catalyst for something much bigger. But even as Alex prepared for the challenge ahead, he didn't realize how much he had yet to learn about the world, himself, and the very nature of success. For now, though, he still had doubts. Was he really cut out for something bigger, or was he just a kid who liked to play with computers? Would anyone ever see his potential? And if they did, would he have the strength to prove them wrong? He was about to find out. The day after Elon Musk visited Redwood Falls, Alex couldn't get the meeting out of his head. He replayed the conversation over and over, as though looking for some clue, some piece of wisdom that would reveal what his next move should be. He could still feel the weight of Musk's gaze when he'd asked Alex if he could be part of something bigger than he'd ever imagined. The words had haunted him, echoing in his thoughts as he walked through the familiar streets of his small town, each step feeling more uncertain than the last. After the meeting, things hadn't changed much in Redwood Falls. People went about their business, unaware of how much the visit had shaken one quiet teenager. For everyone else, Musk's appearance had been a novelty, a chance to say they were in the room with a billionaire, but to Alex, it had been a glimpse of something more, a possibility that life didn't have to be the way it was. It wasn't until a week later that he received the email. The message came through while Alex was working on a new coding project in his bedroom, his fingers moving rapidly over the keyboard as he tried to debug a line of code that just wouldn't cooperate. When he saw the subject line, "Opportunity with SpaceX, response needed," his heart skipped a beat. He sat frozen for a moment, staring at the screen. His first instinct was to dismiss it as a mistake or some sort of spam. But no, the email was from none other than Elon Musk's assistant. Dear Alex Carter. Thank you for your time and the insightful conversation during our recent visit to Redwood Falls. Elon Musk was impressed by your questions and the way you approach problems. He would like to extend an invitation to you to come and visit SpaceX in Hawthorne, California, to discuss a potential collaboration. We believe that your talent could be of great value to some of our upcoming projects. Please let us know your availability, and we will arrange the details. Best regards. Sarah Connor. Executive Assistant to Elon Musk. SpaceX. Alex's fingers hovered over the keyboard as he processed the email. It felt surreal, like something out of a dream. SpaceX. Elon Musk. He had no idea what to expect, but one thing was for sure, this was the opportunity he had been waiting for his entire life. He quickly typed a response, barely able to keep his hand steady. Dear Sarah. Thank you for reaching out. I am incredibly excited about the opportunity and would love to visit SpaceX. Please let me know the next steps, and I will make myself available at your earliest convenience. Best regards. Alex Carter. He hit send before he could second-guess himself, then sat back, staring at the screen. This was it. This was the break he had only dreamed of. But now that the door had opened, Alex couldn't help but feel a knot of anxiety in his stomach. Was he ready for this? Did he have what it took to actually meet the expectations of someone like Elon Musk? Over the next few days, the anticipation built inside him. His friends noticed the change in him, though they didn't know the full extent of what was happening. They saw him spending long hours on his computer, not for schoolwork, but for something bigger. Something that they couldn't even begin to understand. Katie, his sister, wasn't exactly thrilled by the idea of her younger brother being thrust into the spotlight, especially when it meant she was no longer the only one getting attention in the family. I just don't get it, Alex, she said one evening as they sat at the kitchen table. Why SpaceX? Why not go to a regular college, like everyone else? Why do you have to go off and do something crazy? Alex paused, taking in her words. He had never really been able to explain his obsession with technology to anyone, let alone his sister. I don't know, he said quietly, but this feels different. It feels like, the future is opening up to me. Katie scoffed. Future. You're 16, Alex. You're a kid. What makes you think you can just walk into some big company and be treated like you know what you're doing? Her words stung, but Alex had learned not to let them bother him. He'd spent years being underestimated. This was just another challenge to prove them wrong. He wasn't a kid anymore. Not in his mind, at least. And with SpaceX, this was his chance to show the world that he wasn't just some awkward teenager who spent too much time tinkering with computers. By the time Alex received his travel details for the trip to SpaceX, the doubts had been pushed aside. He felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. He wasn't sure what he was walking into, but he knew that if he didn't take this chance, he would always wonder, what if? He couldn't live with that. He had to know if he was capable of more than just small-town dreams. The day of the trip arrived faster than he expected. His parents, still unsure about the whole thing, drove him to the airport. His mom gave him a long hug, her voice shaky as she said, "Just remember to be yourself, Alex. We're proud of you, no matter what happens." Alex nodded, the words sinking in, but he didn't feel ready to face the reality of what was about to unfold. As the plane took off, heading toward Los Angeles, his stomach twisted in knots. SpaceX. California. He was about to meet some of the most brilliant minds in the world, and he wasn't sure if he was prepared for what that would mean. When he arrived at the SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California, he felt the weight of it all. The building was massive, sleek, and futuristic, with bold SpaceX logos adorning the walls. A representative greeted him and escorted him inside, where he was introduced to a team of engineers, designers, and project managers who were all eager to meet the kid from Redwood Falls. The atmosphere was charged with energy, and Alex couldn't help but feel a bit like an outsider, walking into a room full of people who seemed to already have everything figured out. But then Elon Musk himself appeared, walking toward him with that same calm, deliberate manner he had during their first meeting. He gave Alex a firm handshake. "Alex," Musk said, his voice cool but filled with genuine interest, "it's good to finally meet you in person. Let's talk about your ideas." And just like that, Alex felt the full weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. This wasn't some casual meeting. This was the chance to prove himself, to see if he was truly ready to be part of something larger than himself. He could feel the world shifting around him. His future wasn't in Redwood Falls anymore. It was in that room, with Elon Musk and the people who had the power to make his dreams a reality. The door had opened. Now, it was time to step through. Alex had never felt more out of place in his life. When he first walked through the sleek, white halls of SpaceX, everything felt surreal. The walls were adorned with sleek posters showcasing their Mars missions and electric cars. Every turn seemed to present new technology he had only read about or seen in the media. His sneakers squeaked against the polished floors as he followed a SpaceX employee, trying his best to keep up and not appear overwhelmed by the enormity of the place. He couldn't help but feel like an imposter among these people, the professionals who had changed the world in so many ways. Elon Musk had barely said a word since their handshake. He led Alex through the halls, nodding as they passed engineers and designers working at their stations. They stopped at a large conference room where a few other key members of the SpaceX team were already gathered around a table. A dry erase board was covered in equations and sketches of rocket designs. There was an air of quiet intensity, as though these people were on the brink of something huge. Alex swallowed his nervousness. He'd spent his whole life preparing for a moment like this, but now that it was real, the weight of it all felt crushing. Elon gestured for Alex to sit, and everyone turned to face him. There was no easy introduction, no pleasantries. Musk simply looked at him and said, "I want to see what you can do. We've got a project coming up. We need someone who can think outside the box. Can you handle it?" Alex had heard the stories, how Musk's expectations were impossible to meet. People had failed before. There were rumors about how quickly he could make or break careers. But this wasn't some dream he could back out of. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. Alex nodded, trying to swallow the fear that had crept into his throat. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Musk didn't smile. Instead, he turned to one of the engineers who was sitting at the table. The man slid a tablet across the table to Alex. "This is the project. It's a test. We've been working on an ambitious idea, creating a lightweight propulsion system for our next-generation rocket. It's a long shot, but we need fresh eyes. Take a look at the parameters and come back with a solution by tomorrow." Alex took the tablet with a shaking hand, but his mind raced. This was what he'd come for. This was the challenge he'd been waiting for his whole life. The sheet on the tablet was filled with a complex set of equations and notes about the propulsion system. A dozen ideas began to swirl in his mind, but he knew this wasn't just about coming up with an answer. It was about proving he could think like Musk, big, bold, and without limitations. He didn't look up as he absorbed the details. His fingers hovered over the screen as his mind ran through calculations, equations, and variables. It didn't take long for his brain to sink into problem-solving mode. He started making notes in the margins, his hand moving as quickly as his thoughts. Time passed, and the others around him murmured to each other, occasionally glancing at him with curiosity, but he barely noticed. His world had narrowed to the problem at hand. He blocked out everything except for the propulsion system, feeling a sense of exhilaration as he worked through each detail. He could hear Musk's voice again. "I want to see if you can do the impossible." Impossible. Was it impossible? Alex didn't think so. Maybe the rest of the world thought it was. But Alex knew that with the right approach, anything was possible. He just needed to find the key. After a few hours, he sat back in his chair. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He felt his pulse quicken, adrenaline rushing through his veins. There it was. The breakthrough. It wasn't the obvious answer that everyone else would have expected. It wasn't some new material or a design modification. It was a new approach to how the entire system was balanced, a way to maximize efficiency without compromising the power. It wasn't just solving a problem, it was rethinking what was possible. He felt a rush of excitement. This was it. He was about to show them that he wasn't just a kid. He was someone who could think differently, who could solve problems in ways others couldn't even imagine. Alex stood up and approached the dry erase board. He began writing his solution, explaining each step of the way as his mind raced to make sure he wasn't missing anything. He could feel the eyes of the SpaceX team on him, but he was too deep in the process to be intimidated now. Musk watched silently, arms folded, his face unreadable. Alex explained his reasoning, detailing the unique adjustments he had made to the propulsion system. The team members exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. The room was silent, except for the sound of Alex's voice and the scribbling of his marker. When he finished, Alex stepped back, out of breath but satisfied. The solution was simple but elegant, a reflection of his ability to think beyond conventional wisdom. Now, it was up to the team to decide whether or not he had truly cracked the code. There was a long silence as everyone looked at Musk. Finally, Musk spoke, his voice calm and measured. "This is different. Very different. I think you've got something here. We'll test it." Alex's heart skipped a beat. "You mean, you'll use it?" Musk nodded. "We're not in the business of theory. We're in the business of solving real problems. And I think you've just helped us do that." The team immediately went into action, beginning to organize tests and simulations. Alex stood there, barely able to process what had just happened. He had done it. Not only had he earned their respect, but he had also just solved a problem that could impact the future of space travel. As the team prepared to put his design into action, Elon Musk turned to Alex and said, "This isn't the end. It's just the beginning. Let's see if you can keep up." And just like that, Alex understood. This was his moment. He had been thrown into the deep end, and he had come through. But this was only the start of what was going to be a long, grueling journey. And the hardest part was still ahead. The days following the test were a blur. Alex barely slept, his mind constantly running through equations, designs, and scenarios in an attempt to refine the propulsion system he'd proposed. The pressure was mounting. He had solved the initial problem, but that was just the beginning. In a company like SpaceX, one success didn't guarantee anything. Musk's words kept echoing in his mind, "Let's see if you can keep up." The weight of that challenge was starting to sink in. Alex had never been thrown into something so high stakes, so intense. He'd never worked in an environment where every decision had the potential to change the future of space travel. There were no small mistakes here. Even a tiny error could set back months, maybe years, of progress. The realization hit him hard, but it didn't scare him. Not yet. But the doubts had started to creep in. Every time he walked into the conference room, he was greeted by the same sharp stares of SpaceX's best engineers and designers, all of them studying his every move. They'd seen countless brilliant minds come through the door, only to burn out or fail to live up to expectations. Alex wasn't sure if he belonged in the same room as them, but he couldn't let them see his uncertainty. He had to prove he was capable, not just to Musk, but to everyone around him. The first day after his success, Musk pulled Alex aside and led him into a small meeting room. It was just the two of them, Elon, with his characteristic calm, and Alex, trying to keep his composure as he sat across from him. "Elon, what's going on?" Alex asked, his voice laced with both curiosity and apprehension. I mean, I know we've made progress with the propulsion system, but I don't know if I'm ready for whatever's next. Elon smiled a little, though there was a hint of something unreadable in his eyes. That's exactly why I'm here, Alex. You think you're not ready, but you don't even know how far you've come. What I see in you isn't just a kid who can solve problems, it's someone who can think about things differently. That's what we need here. Alex didn't know how to respond. He was still reeling from the whirlwind of the past few days. Part of him felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, not sure if he was about to fall or fly. Musk's confidence in him was both encouraging and terrifying. Could he really live up to that trust? Could he handle the responsibility? Musk leaned in, his voice growing more intense. But now, I'm going to test you further. I've got a new challenge for you, a real one. Something that'll push you to your limits. Alex's heart skipped a beat. What was this new test? Was it another design challenge? Or was it something more personal? You've proven that you can handle the theoretical side of things, Musk continued. But now I need to see how you handle the pressure. The next test isn't about making the right decision. It's about how you deal with everything that comes with it. Before Alex could respond, Musk turned and walked out of the room, leaving him sitting there, completely unsure of what to expect. The next day, the challenge was revealed. It wasn't another theoretical problem. It wasn't even another design. Instead, Musk had brought in a small team of engineers, but this time, the project they were working on wasn't a typical SpaceX mission. It was a private contract, something that could make or break a huge deal for the company. Musk gathered everyone in a large conference room. Alex was there, standing at the back with the rest of the team, as Musk explained the situation. We've got a client who needs a very specific solution, Elon began. It's a propulsion system that needs to work within a very short time frame. We've got 3 days to deliver a prototype. The challenge is that this system has to be not only functional but also efficient enough to meet a tight budget. The room was silent for a moment. Alex's mind began to spin. 3 days. A working prototype. He hadn't even been involved in a project with a timeline that tight before. The stakes felt higher than ever. If they failed, the entire team would be responsible. And it wouldn't just be a failure, it would be a major setback for SpaceX, with consequences that could extend far beyond this one project. This isn't just about engineering, Musk continued, his gaze sweeping the room. It's about making hard choices, prioritizing under pressure, and ensuring that we can deliver something groundbreaking within an impossible timeframe. He turned to Alex, his eyes locking with his. Alex, I want you to lead this team. You'll be in charge of making sure we stay on track. You'll have to make decisions that could affect the entire outcome. Alex's throat went dry. Lead the team. He wasn't ready for this. Sure, he'd been a part of the process before, but to actually lead it? It felt like too much too soon. I don't know if I can do it, Alex said, barely above a whisper. I've never led anything this big. Musk looked at him, his expression unreadable. That's the point. I want to see how you perform under pressure. You've got the skills. But now I need to see if you can lead this team, make the hard calls, and see it through. We need results, Alex. And with that, the challenge was set. Alex was thrown into the deep end, expected to lead a team of professionals, some of whom had been working in the field for longer than he had been alive. The pressure was suffocating, but it also sparked something inside him, a fire he hadn't known existed. For the next 3 days, Alex lived and breathed the project. He worked alongside engineers, fielding questions, making decisions, and trying to balance the needs of the prototype with the practicalities of time and budget. The clock ticked relentlessly, and every decision felt weightier than the last. They had to innovate, but they couldn't afford to make mistakes. They were working with limited resources, and time was running out. In the chaos, Alex discovered something about himself. He didn't just have the technical skills, he had a way of thinking that made the impossible seem possible. The more the team doubted themselves, the more Alex stepped up. When the engineers hit a roadblock, he found solutions. When the client demanded a change in the design, Alex found a way to pivot without sacrificing quality. It wasn't easy. Every day felt like a sprint toward a finish line that was just out of reach. But with every passing hour, Alex grew more confident in his ability to handle the responsibility. He wasn't just some kid who had cracked a complex problem, he was a leader. And for the first time, he realized that maybe, just maybe, he belonged here. By the third day, the prototype was ready. It wasn't perfect, there were still tweaks to be made, but it was functional, efficient, and delivered ahead of schedule. As the team gathered to review the final product, Alex couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This wasn't just a win for him, it was a win for the entire team. Musk walked into the room, nodding in approval as he took in the prototype. "Well done, Alex," he said. "You've done what I expected. You've proven you can handle the pressure, and you've delivered. This is the kind of leadership we need." The word sent a rush of pride through Alex. He had done it. He had passed the test. But deep down, he knew this was just the beginning. The challenges ahead would be even greater, but for the first time, he felt like he was ready for whatever came next. The victory from the previous project still lingered in the air, but Alex knew better than to rest on his laurels. The success of the prototype had earned him praise from Musk and the team, but in SpaceX, there was no time for complacency. It was a place where every triumph felt like a stepping stone to something bigger, and every failure was a lesson carved into the company's DNA. The next day, Alex was thrust into yet another challenge, one that would test his ability to not only innovate but trust others. It began when Musk summoned him to his office. The office was sleek, minimalistic, exactly what one would expect from a tech genius who'd reshaped entire industries. Elon was standing by the window, staring out at the sprawling SpaceX campus below. The sight of the bustling facility always seemed to ground Alex, but today, there was a certain heaviness in the air. He could tell something was different. "You're ready for this next test, Alex," Musk said, without turning around. His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of something more serious in his tone. Alex stood in the doorway, uncertain. "What's the challenge?" Musk finally turned to face him, a small but knowing smile tugging at his lips. "I'm giving you a team of your own. You've proved you can think on your feet and deliver under pressure. Now, I need to see if you can build a team that can do the same." Alex's stomach did a flip. "You want me to lead a team? Again?" "Yes," Musk nodded, his smile unwavering. "But this time, it's different. You're not just overseeing a project, you're building something from the ground up. You'll be in charge of creating an entirely new propulsion system for the Mars mission. It's a high-risk venture, and it's going to need collaboration. Trust. You won't be doing this alone." Alex felt a knot form in his stomach. The idea of leading a team of seasoned engineers who had decades of experience was intimidating. How could someone like him, still so new, be entrusted with something this monumental? But he couldn't back down. He had worked his whole life for a moment like this. He knew that being a part of the mission to Mars wasn't just a chance to prove himself, it was an opportunity to leave his mark on history. "Okay," Alex said, a bit more resolutely than he felt. "I'll do it." Elon didn't offer reassurance, but his gaze lingered for a moment longer than usual, as if sizing up Alex. Finally, he spoke. "Good. Just remember one thing, this is about trust. You've got the skills, but it's the team that will make or break this. If you can't get them to trust you, you'll fail. And I'm not in the business of failure." Alex nodded, absorbing the weight of Elon's words. As the door closed behind him, a new sense of responsibility washed over him. This wasn't just another test of his abilities, it was a test of his leadership, his ability to inspire and trust others, and his capacity to unite a group of brilliant minds behind a common goal. Alex's first step was to assemble his team. He was given a list of engineers, designers, and specialists from across the company, each with their own area of expertise. The names on the list were intimidating. Some were veterans who had worked on everything from Falcon rockets to the Starship program. Others were young innovators, fresh out of university but already recognized for their raw talent. He scheduled the first meeting for the following day, eager but also anxious about how the team would respond to him as their leader. He had no formal experience managing a group like this. What if they didn't respect him? What if they saw him as just another kid who had no business leading such an important project? As the meeting room filled with engineers, designers, and specialists, Alex stood at the front, trying to project confidence. He was still unsure of himself, but he couldn't let that show. He had to set the tone from the beginning. "All right, everyone," Alex started, clearing his throat. "We've got a big challenge ahead of us. We're designing the propulsion system that will take the next generation of rockets to Mars. It's going to be hard. We're up against some serious deadlines, and we'll be pushing the limits of what's possible. But if we work together, we can do this. We have to trust each other. And most importantly, we have to trust the process." The room was silent as everyone looked at him, waiting for more direction. Alex felt the weight of their gazes on him. For a brief moment, he faltered. What could he say that would convince them he was the one to lead this team? The doubts crept in, but he pushed them aside. "The plan is simple," Alex continued, his voice gaining strength. "We'll divide the work into 3 parts: design, testing, and analysis. Each of you will take the lead in your areas of expertise, but we'll need constant communication. We can't afford silos. We need to push boundaries, but we also need to be flexible. If something's not working, we'll pivot, and we'll pivot fast." He looked at the faces in the room, some skeptical, some curious, but all attentive. "I'm not here to do this alone," Alex added, his tone more genuine. "I'll rely on each of you to make this a success. We've got one shot at this, and I'm counting on you. Let's get to work." There was a long pause before one of the senior engineers, Greg, spoke up. "You've got guts, kid. I'll give you that. But if you think you can just wave a magic wand and solve this problem, you're in for a rude awakening." Alex met his gaze, unfazed. "I don't have all the answers, Greg. But I'm here to listen, and I'm here to learn from you. Let's figure it out together." To his surprise, Greg nodded approvingly, and the tension in the room eased slightly. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, sketches, simulations, and endless brainstorming sessions. Alex found himself constantly jumping between different parts of the project, helping to solve complex technical problems, providing guidance on testing, and managing communication between team members. It was exhausting, but there was something incredibly fulfilling about watching the project slowly come together. The hardest part wasn't designing the propulsion system itself, it was making sure the team stayed aligned. Each member had their own vision of how the project should go, and Alex had to find a way to guide them toward a unified solution. There were moments of frustration, where it felt like progress was grinding to a halt, but with each setback came a lesson. Slowly, Alex learned to navigate the delicate balance between directing the team and giving them the freedom to solve problems on their own. And through it all, he began to realize something important: he wasn't just the leader of this team. He was part of it. He couldn't do this without them, and they couldn't do it without him. Trust wasn't something you could demand, it was something you had to earn, and he knew he had to prove himself to every single person on the team. One night, as Alex sat at his desk, reviewing the latest test results, a knock came at the door. He looked up to see Greg standing in the doorway, holding a coffee cup. "You're working late," Greg said, raising an eyebrow. "You've been burning the candle at both ends." Alex sighed. "I know. But we're so close. I can feel it." Greg took a step into the room, sitting down across from him. "You know, kid, there are a lot of people here who think you don't belong in charge. But I think you've got something. You've been listening to everyone, and you've been flexible. You don't just force your vision on us, you let us contribute. That's rare around here. Alex stared at Greg, unsure if he was hearing right. Thanks, Greg. That means a lot. Greg smiled, clapping him on the shoulder. Just keep it up. You're doing all right. As Greg left, Alex sat back in his chair, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over him. The team was starting to trust him. And that trust? It was the foundation they needed to succeed. Alex had barely begun to find his rhythm as a leader when disaster struck. Just when things seemed to be moving smoothly, when the propulsion system was taking shape and the team's morale was high, everything came crashing down. It started on a Tuesday morning, when the team was gathered in the conference room for a routine testing update. Alex had been feeling unusually confident about the progress. They were ahead of schedule, and every test so far had shown promising results. But then, one of the senior engineers, Claire, stood up with a look of worry on her face, holding a tablet in her hands. Alex, Claire said, her voice tight with anxiety. We've run into a major problem. The latest test results aren't what we expected. The propulsion system is overheating under extreme conditions. We're talking a potential failure that could jeopardize the entire mission. Alex's heart sank. He had been so focused on the big picture, so convinced they were on the right track, that he hadn't anticipated something like this. It wasn't just a small glitch, it was a critical issue that could derail everything they had worked for. He quickly moved to Claire's side, looking at the data she was showing him. The numbers were glaring. The system was reaching temperatures far beyond the acceptable limits, causing a potential risk to both the rocket and the crew. This can't be happening, Alex muttered to himself, trying to process the severity of the situation. We've tested this 100 times. How could this be possible? That's what I'm trying to figure out, Claire replied, her voice tense. We've accounted for everything we could think of, but this anomaly, it's throwing us off. Alex took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing thoughts. The pressure was back, heavier than ever. His team was looking to him for answers, for reassurance, but all he had was uncertainty. This wasn't just a minor setback, it was a critical failure that threatened the entire project. I need you all to give me a moment, Alex said, his voice steady but firm. I'm going to meet with the team and figure out what went wrong. As the others filtered out of the room, Alex felt a wave of responsibility crash over him. This was the moment he had feared, the one where the weight of leadership really hit him. There was no playbook for this. No easy solution. If they couldn't fix this, it wasn't just the propulsion system that would fail, it would be the entire mission. And if the mission failed, so did he. The next few hours were a whirlwind of brainstorming sessions, analysis, and frustration. Alex gathered his core team of engineers, Claire, Greg, and a few others, and they huddled around a whiteboard, going over every possible angle. What could be causing the overheating? Was it a flaw in the materials? A design issue? A miscalculation in the simulations? The team worked tirelessly, throwing out idea after idea, trying to pinpoint the problem. But nothing seemed to make sense. Every time they thought they had a solution, another complication arose. The pressure was mounting with each passing minute, and Alex could feel the strain of it all. At one point, Greg turned to him, his face drawn with exhaustion. Alex, we need to slow down. We're jumping from one hypothesis to the next without fully testing anything. We're getting nowhere fast. Alex nodded, rubbing his temples. He knew Greg was right. In the rush to find a solution, they had been moving too quickly, skipping steps in their eagerness to get back on track. They needed to regroup, refocus, and come at this from a new angle. We'll take a step back, Alex said, the decision coming to him with a sudden clarity. Let's break this down systematically. No more jumping ahead. We need to understand exactly what's going wrong before we make any changes. He called for another round of meetings with specialists and other team members. Over the next few hours, they began isolating the issue, a flaw in the cooling system that hadn't been accounted for in their initial designs. The system was unable to regulate temperature under the extreme stress it would face during the Mars mission, leading to the overheating. But even with this discovery, the solution wasn't immediate. The fix would require modifications to the entire design, and time was running out. The mission timeline had already been stretched thin, and now they were facing a critical delay that could potentially set them back by months. The realization hit Alex like a ton of bricks. He had to make a decision. They could keep pushing forward with the flawed design, hoping for a quick fix and risking failure, or they could revise the entire cooling system and face the consequences of a delay. Neither option was appealing. As he sat in the quiet of his office, reviewing the latest reports, the weight of the decision weighed heavily on him. He couldn't afford to make the wrong choice. If he pushed for the fast fix and it failed, the entire project could be doomed. But if he pushed for the longer fix, they might lose valuable time, and possibly the trust of Musk and the rest of the team. Elon's voice echoed in his mind, "Trust your instincts. You've got this, Alex." But even with that reassurance, Alex knew this was his hardest challenge yet. The next morning, Alex called the team together for an emergency meeting. He needed to make his decision clear. "We've identified the problem," he began, addressing the group. "The cooling system is the cause of the overheating. It wasn't up to the extreme conditions we need for Mars. Now we have two options, one is to try a quick fix and hope it works. The other is to redesign the cooling system and risk a delay. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, both options have major risks." The team looked to Alex, waiting for him to make the call. Claire and Greg exchanged glances, clearly uneasy. Alex took a deep breath, his mind racing. "I know the pressure is high," he continued, meeting each person's eyes in turn. "But we can't afford to cut corners on something this critical. We're designing a system that will carry people to Mars. If we don't get this right, we're risking lives. So, I'm choosing the long fix. We'll redesign the cooling system and take the time we need to make it right." There was a moment of silence, but then Claire spoke up. "I agree. We've got to do it the right way. We can't afford another failure." Greg nodded. "It's going to be tough, but I think we can do it. Let's get started." Alex felt a wave of relief wash over him. The team was with him. They were ready to take on the challenge together, even though it meant a longer road ahead. For the next few weeks, the team worked tirelessly. The redesign of the cooling system was no small task, it involved redesigning multiple components and running simulations to test its effectiveness. The work was exhausting, both physically and mentally, but Alex began to see the results. The system was improving. They were on track to have a working solution, though the timeline was tighter than ever. Every day, Alex found himself growing more confident in his role as a leader. He wasn't just solving problems anymore, he was guiding the team through adversity, helping them stay focused even when the road ahead seemed impossible. He had earned their trust, and now he had to prove that their faith in him was well placed. Finally, after weeks of grueling work, they ran the final tests on the new system. The results came in, and this time, they were perfect. The cooling system was functional, efficient, and capable of handling the extreme conditions it would face on the Mars mission. The propulsion system was back on track. Alex let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. They had done it. They had overcome the first major setback and come out stronger on the other side. As he walked back to his office, Alex felt a new sense of resolve. The path to Mars wasn't easy, and it never would be. But with every challenge, they were one step closer. And he was ready for whatever came next. Weeks had passed since the cooling system issue had been resolved, and while the team was finally back on track, Alex knew it wasn't over. They had managed to overcome one massive obstacle, but the road to Mars was littered with challenges. What had been a small hiccup in the grand scheme of things now felt like an indication of just how difficult the path ahead would be. But if there was one thing Alex had learned from Elon Musk, it was that failure was merely a stepping stone to success. The more you failed, the closer you got to achieving something truly groundbreaking. But the team's morale was starting to waver. Despite the recent successes, the long hours, the pressure of the looming deadline, and the stress of the high-stakes mission were beginning to take their toll. Alex could see it in their eyes, the weariness of people who had given everything but weren't sure how much more they could give. The team was stretched thin. Some engineers had been working late nights for weeks, and the toll was becoming visible. Tired eyes, frayed tempers, and mistakes starting to slip through, Alex felt the burden of leadership more than ever. It was during one of these late-night sessions when everything began to crack. Alex was pacing around the lab, trying to make sense of the latest simulation data. The propulsion system's performance was still slightly off, and time was running out. They had a test flight scheduled in just a few days, and he was beginning to question whether they were ready. The team had made incredible strides in fixing the issues with the cooling system, but there were still lingering problems. The pressure of making it work in time was pushing everyone to their limit. "Hey, Alex, can we talk for a second?" Claire's voice interrupted his thoughts. Alex turned, seeing the concerned expression on Claire's face. She wasn't the type to call attention to problems unless they were serious. Her words felt like the calm before a storm. "Yeah, sure," Alex said, his voice a little strained. "What's up?" Claire walked over, hesitating before sitting down beside him. "I'm concerned," she said bluntly, "about how much longer we can keep pushing like this. Everyone is tired, Alex. We've been working non-stop for months, and the test flight is just around the corner. I'm starting to see cracks in the team. People are snapping at each other over small things. It's getting to the point where I'm not sure we're making the right decisions anymore." Alex ran a hand through his hair, feeling a sense of guilt welling up inside him. He knew it was true, he'd seen the same things. They'd pushed so hard to fix the problems that they'd forgotten to look after the most important thing of all, themselves. The people on the team. "I know," he said, his voice quiet. "But we can't afford to slow down now. We've come too far to back out." Claire looked at him with a mixture of frustration and concern. "I'm not saying we back out, Alex. I'm saying we need to take a step back and reassess. We need to make sure we're still operating with clarity, not just pushing through exhaustion." He was silent for a moment, wrestling with his thoughts. He knew she was right. But the pressure of the mission, of Elon's expectations, was suffocating. A delay now could cost them everything. And Alex knew there were no second chances with this kind of mission. "I can't afford to let them down," he whispered, almost to himself. Claire softened her tone. "You're not alone in this. But you need to take care of yourself, too. You can't lead a team if you're running on empty." Alex felt a pang of guilt. His sleepless nights, constant stress, and the weight of the mission had taken a toll on him as well. He'd been so focused on the goal that he had neglected the people who had helped get them this far, and even himself. Before he could respond, a sudden outburst echoed from the other side of the room. It was Greg, one of the senior engineers, his face red with anger as he slammed down a tablet onto the desk. The sound cut through the tension in the room, making everyone stop and turn. "This isn't working," Greg shouted, his voice sharp. "We're running around in circles, chasing our own tails. We can't keep pretending we're on track when we're not even close." Alex's heart sank. The anger in Greg's voice wasn't just frustration, it was exhaustion. Everyone on the team had been running on fumes for too long, and this was the breaking point. "Greg, we're almost there," Alex said, trying to remain calm despite the rising tension. "We just need a little more time." Greg shook his head, pacing back and forth. "No, Alex. We've been almost there 4 weeks now. We keep fixing one problem and another one pops up. We're not getting any closer to the finish line, we're just burning ourselves out." The other team members were silent, watching the confrontation unfold. Alex could see the same frustration reflected in their eyes. They were all feeling it, the exhaustion, the pressure, the weight of the mission that had become more than just a technical challenge. It was beginning to feel like an impossible dream. But then, something shifted inside Alex. He took a deep breath, pushed aside the panic that threatened to take over, and steadied his voice. "I hear you, Greg. I know we're all feeling the strain. But we can't stop now. The test flight is critical. If we miss it, we lose our shot at the Mars mission. You know that." Greg stared at him for a long moment, the anger in his eyes softening. "I know, Alex. But we're not machines. We need a break. We need time to regroup." Alex stood there, feeling torn. He didn't want to admit it, but Greg was right. They couldn't keep going at this pace. Not without burning out completely. "All right," Alex said finally, his voice firm but compassionate. "We'll take a break. One day. A reset. I'm calling for a team day off tomorrow. We'll take a step back, clear our heads, and then we'll come back to this with fresh eyes." Claire nodded approvingly. "That's what we need. It's not about stepping back from the mission, it's about coming back stronger." The room was still tense, but Alex could see a flicker of relief in everyone's eyes. It was clear that, for the first time in weeks, they all felt like they could breathe again. The next day, the team took a break. No testing, no simulations, no endless meetings. Alex insisted they take the time to clear their heads, spend time with family, or simply rest. It was a difficult decision, but it was the right one. For Alex, it was a revelation. He hadn't realized just how much the pressure had been weighing on him until he stopped. He took the day to go for a run, something he hadn't done in months, and spent some time reflecting on everything that had happened so far. The mission, the people, the choices. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but they had come too far to give up now. When the team returned the following day, they were recharged. They had clarity. Alex had clarity. The pressure didn't seem as overwhelming, and the problems that had once felt insurmountable now seemed more manageable. They were ready to tackle the next stage of the mission. Together. In the weeks that followed, the team found their stride again. With their renewed energy, they were able to fine-tune the propulsion system and run the final tests. The systems began to align, the performance improved, and the once distant goal of the Mars mission began to feel tangible once more. And while Alex knew that more obstacles lay ahead, he also understood that true leadership wasn't about pushing through at any cost, it was about knowing when to pause, reassess, and then move forward with renewed determination. After their much-needed break, the team had rallied. The last few weeks of preparation had been exhausting, but the momentum was building. They had addressed the most critical issues with the propulsion system, the cooling design was holding strong, and the launch pad was nearly ready for the test flight. Alex had always known that this was the moment where everything would either come together or fall apart. But now, with the team reinvigorated and the systems finally ready for testing, he felt a cautious optimism creeping in. The test flight wasn't just another milestone, it was the milestone. It would provide the first real confirmation that everything they had built, every sleepless night, every setback, every triumph, was actually capable of taking them to Mars. There would be no turning back after this. If the test flight succeeded, it would pave the way for full-scale development. If it failed, well, they couldn't afford to think about that. The day of the test flight arrived, and the air in the control room was thick with anticipation. Alex stood at the front, watching as engineers and technicians buzzed around, checking systems, making final adjustments, and running diagnostics on the rocket. He could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on him, even though they were all focused on the screens in front of them. It wasn't just the technology at stake, it was his leadership. His decisions. The faith Elon Musk had placed in him. Everything hinged on this one moment. "Alex, we're ready for final checks," Claire said, her voice steady but carrying the slight edge of nerves. She was the one person on the team Alex could always rely on for level-headedness, but even she had that flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. He turned to her, meeting her gaze. "We're good to go, right?" "As good as we can be," Claire replied, giving a nod. "All systems are functioning within specs. But it's still a test flight. There are variables we can't predict." Alex nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. There was always uncertainty. The unknowns were part of the equation. Still, the preparations had been as thorough as they could have been, and he had to trust his team. "Then let's do it," Alex said, his voice filled with determination. With a few final nods, the team moved into position, coordinating with the flight controllers. The rocket, a sleek, powerful machine designed to launch them to Mars, stood tall on the launch pad, its engines powered up, its systems ready for the most crucial test of its life. As the countdown began, Alex's heart pounded in his chest. His fingers tapped nervously on the console in front of him, but he kept his face composed, focusing on the process at hand. He glanced at Claire, then Greg, then the rest of the team, watching their expressions. Everyone was focused, but there was an air of tension in the room that no one could escape. This was the moment they had been waiting for. 5, 4, 3. The countdown echoed through the control room. Alex held his breath. His eyes locked on the launch pad's feed as the rocket's engines flared to life. 2, 1. The final second stretched out like an eternity. The rocket shot upwards, rising from the launch pad with an intensity that sent a wave of heat through the room. For a brief moment, it seemed to defy gravity, and then it was airborne, ascending higher and higher into the sky. Cheers erupted in the control room as the rocket cleared the atmosphere. The tension that had filled the room moments earlier melted into elation. Alex exhaled deeply, his heart still racing, but now from excitement, not anxiety. "This is it," Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex smiled. "We did it. But we're not out of the woods yet." The rocket's trajectory was still being monitored, and the most critical part of the test was still ahead. The next phase was about ensuring that the propulsion system would perform as it was supposed to under pressure. The real test wasn't just the launch, it was the way the system would react once they simulated the harsh conditions of space travel. The overheating issue, the very one that had nearly derailed everything a few weeks ago, was still looming in the background. Alex had to see the system hold up, or the mission could be as good as over. Hours later, the test reached its critical stage. The rocket was in space, its propulsion system running at full capacity, and the data was coming in fast. Alex's eyes darted between multiple monitors, watching the temperature readings, the velocity, and the fuel usage. The team was quiet, their collective breath held, as they monitored every minute detail of the system's performance. Then, the first wave of tension hit. "Temperatures climbing," Greg called out, his voice low but urgent. Alex leaned in, focusing on the readings. "How high?" "Not enough to cause a failure yet, but it's climbing faster than expected," Greg replied, his fingers flying over his console. "We need to adjust the cooling flow immediately." Alex stood frozen for a moment. This was it, the moment when they would either see the system hold or crumble under pressure. He had to make a decision, and fast. Every second mattered. "Do it," Alex said firmly. The team sprang into action, implementing adjustments to the system. The data was coming in too quickly to process all at once, but Alex focused on staying calm, trusting his team. Claire and Greg worked together, making minute changes to the system, feeding back information in real time. Come on," Alex muttered under his breath, watching the temperature gauge rise and fall as the system adapted. Another few tense minutes passed, and then, finally, the temperature began to stabilize. The cooling system had done its job. The propulsion system was running smoothly again. "System's holding steady," Greg said, his voice relieved. "We're in the green." Alex let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The room broke into cautious applause, but Alex wasn't ready to celebrate yet. They had made it through the most critical phase of the test flight, but there was still a lot to do. The data needed to be reviewed, the final systems checked. But for the first time in weeks, Alex allowed himself to feel a flicker of hope. Later that evening, as the test flight came to an end, Alex sat alone in the control room, staring at the data on the monitors. The rocket was on its descent back to Earth, and the team had already begun analyzing the results. But Alex needed a moment of peace, a moment to reflect on everything that had led to this point. This had been the test they couldn't afford to fail, and they hadn't. They had done it. The propulsion system had worked. The cooling system had held up. The dream of Mars was still alive. And yet, even as a small sense of victory began to settle in, Alex knew this was only the beginning. There would be more tests, more failures, more obstacles. There was no guarantee that this was the end of the road. But one thing was clear, Alex and his team had proven they were capable. They had overcome setbacks, pushed through exhaustion, and persevered. And that meant they were ready for whatever came next. As Alex made his way home that evening, a strange peace washed over him. He had made it through the toughest challenge of his career, but there was still so much work to be done. The mission to Mars was closer than ever. The real test, the ultimate challenge, still lay ahead. But for the first time in months, Alex was certain of one thing. They could do this. The days following the successful test flight were filled with a sense of quiet accomplishment, but Alex knew better than to rest on their laurels. The success of the test was just one step, and they had no time to celebrate. The Mars mission was still a distant, looming target, and the road ahead was filled with challenges that were far from predictable. The elation of the past week faded quickly, replaced by the nagging reminder that failure wasn't something they could afford to entertain. The first batch of results from the test flight had been thoroughly examined, and everything was looking good. The propulsion system was stable, the cooling technology had held under stress, and the rocket's flight trajectory had been perfect. But as Alex sat down in his office, going through the data once again, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still lurking, something that hadn't been accounted for. It wasn't the test flight itself that worried him, it was what came next. The real challenge wasn't just getting the rocket into space, but ensuring it could withstand the harsh conditions of Mars' atmosphere and the long journey there. They had made great strides, but every new step felt like a leap into the unknown. And the pressure to succeed was overwhelming. "Alex, we need to talk," Claire's voice crackled through the intercom, breaking his train of thought. He exhaled and leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "What's up, Claire?" "It's about the mission schedule," she replied. "We're falling behind on the testing for the landing system. The clock is ticking, and I'm starting to feel like we're losing ground." Alex knew that landing on Mars was the next big hurdle. Getting to Mars was one thing, but getting the rocket down safely was something else entirely. The landing system was a complicated piece of technology, and they were running out of time to perfect it. "I know," Alex said, standing up from his desk. "But we'll make it. We always have. Let's meet in the conference room in 10. The team gathered around the conference table, the mood noticeably more tense than it had been in weeks. Everyone could feel the weight of the mission bearing down on them. The clock was ticking, and the next test, this time for the landing system, was critical. "All right," Alex said, standing at the front of the room. "We're at a crossroads. The test flight was a success, but that doesn't mean we're out of the woods. The landing system is next, and we need to get it right. Claire, Greg, where are we with the design?" Claire spoke first. "We've run several simulations, and the results aren't great. The system doesn't handle the atmospheric pressure shift as smoothly as we hoped. We're still working on ways to adjust the descent velocity. If we don't get that under control, the whole thing could fail." Greg chimed in. "And even then, we're still dealing with the unexpected behavior of the surface pressure on Mars. The sensors we've been using are showing some inconsistencies. It's as if we're missing a key factor in how the Martian environment reacts." Alex's stomach churned. They'd been so focused on the propulsion and cooling systems that the landing system had started to slip under the radar. They had overlooked a critical detail, and now it was coming back to haunt them. But there was no time to panic. "All right, what do we need to do?" Alex asked, his voice firm. "We need more data. We'll have to conduct a series of real-world simulations, but that means we need more time," Claire replied. Alex ran a hand through his hair. "Time is something we don't have. If we don't get this right, the mission's over before it even starts. We're running up against the launch window." He could see the frustration in Claire's eyes. She wasn't just concerned for the mission, she was concerned for the team. She knew that pushing for more time would come at the cost of their sanity. And while they had made incredible progress, the reality of Mars was beginning to feel much more daunting than they had anticipated. "We need to act fast," Greg said. "Maybe we could focus on getting a prototype on the ground and testing it with a smaller scale model. That would give us more time to refine the landing system without jeopardizing the whole mission." Alex nodded thoughtfully. The idea made sense. They had to find a way to continue testing while simultaneously working on the full-scale rocket. "Do it," Alex said. "But we need to keep up with the propulsion system testing as well. We can't afford to lose ground on that front." The next several days were a blur of frantic work and high-pressure decisions. The team had pivoted to focus on creating a smaller, more manageable prototype for the landing system. It wasn't ideal, but it would give them the data they needed to make crucial adjustments. While Claire and Greg worked on the new design, Alex found himself spending late nights in the lab, combing through simulations, trying to ensure they hadn't overlooked anything else. He couldn't afford to ignore a single detail. But despite their best efforts, Alex felt the clock ticking faster and faster. The tension between the team was palpable. People were stretched thin, the weight of the mission ever present on their shoulders. Alex could see it in their eyes: anxiety, exhaustion, and that nagging feeling that they were running out of time. It was one of those late nights when Alex received an unexpected message, an encrypted message from Elon Musk himself. "Alex, this is it," the message began. "You've got one shot. Make sure it's perfect." It was short, blunt, and to the point. There was no doubt in Alex's mind that Elon was watching every step of the mission, holding them accountable. The weight of that responsibility was suffocating. Elon's words weren't just a motivational pep talk, they were a reminder that they were in the final stretch. There was no room for error. Alex leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen, his mind racing. He could feel the pressure mounting, the expectations growing heavier by the second. They were so close, too close to fail now. Just as Alex was about to dig deeper into the simulations, a sudden alarm blared in the background, cutting through his thoughts. It wasn't the usual alert. The red light flashing on his console was different, urgent. "Alex, you need to come to the control room now," Claire's voice crackled through the intercom, panic evident in her tone. He didn't hesitate. In the control room, the atmosphere was tense. The team had gathered around the central monitor, their faces filled with concern. Alex could feel his heart rate increase as he approached the team, scanning the data on the screen. Something was wrong. "We've lost contact with the prototype," Greg explained, his voice strained. "The communications systems were working fine until just a few minutes ago. Now, we can't get any data from the landing test." Alex's stomach dropped. This was the last thing they needed. "What happened?" Alex asked, trying to steady his breathing. "We're not sure," Claire said. "It could be a glitch in the communications array, but this doesn't feel like a simple malfunction." A deep silence filled the room. The success of the prototype was crucial. Without it, the mission's future was uncertain. If the prototype failed, they might not have the data needed to fix the full-scale landing system in time. "We need to figure this out now," Alex said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Get a team on this, find out what went wrong and get us back online." As the team scrambled to identify the issue, Alex's mind raced. They couldn't afford to lose the prototype. This wasn't just a failure, it was a setback that could cost them everything. And in that moment, Alex realized the true enemy they were facing wasn't just technical failures, Mars, or even Elon Musk's expectations. It was time itself. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The hum of the control room was almost deafening, a chorus of flashing lights, low voices, and rapid typing. It was late, and the team had been working non-stop since the prototype communication failure. Alex's mind raced as he tried to piece together what had gone wrong. They couldn't afford a setback now. Not after everything they had been through. This prototype landing system was their only shot at ensuring the full-scale rocket would land safely on Mars. Without it, the mission was essentially doomed before it had even begun. Have we pinpointed the issue? Alex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The exhaustion in his voice matched the fatigue he saw in the faces around him. Claire glanced at Greg, who was hunched over his screen, his fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard. Not yet, Claire replied, her voice tight. The communications array could have suffered a hardware failure, but it's more likely that we're dealing with something in the software. We might be looking at a deeper systemic problem. Deeper? Alex repeated, the word hanging in the air like an ominous cloud. They couldn't afford another systemic problem. Not after the cooling system failure, not after the propulsion issues, not after so many failed attempts at finding stability. I'll dig into it further, Greg said, his brow furrowed in concentration. But it's going to take time. We'll need to rerun diagnostics on the whole system and isolate the specific component causing the failure. Alex's hands clenched into fists. Time. That was the one thing they didn't have. Their launch window was closing, and with each hour that ticked by, the odds of making it to Mars grew slimmer. We don't have time for that, Alex said, his voice sharp, cutting through the murmur of the room. He walked up to Greg's station, his pulse quickening. We need a solution, and we need it now. Greg looked up, his face pale. Alex, if we don't get this right, we're looking at a major failure in the full-scale system. We could lose everything. It's not just about fixing the communication glitch, we need to make sure that everything is working together, sensors, cooling, propulsion, everything. If we don't get the system's integrity right, it's all for nothing. Alex's throat tightened. The pressure was unbearable. But he knew Greg was right. There were no shortcuts in space exploration. Not when everything they were building was meant to carry humans to another planet. The safety of the crew, the success of the mission, and the legacy of everything they had worked for hinged on the next few days. We can't fail, Greg, Alex said, his voice low but full of intent. If this prototype doesn't work, we're going to have to push back the entire mission. Greg nodded solemnly. I know. Claire stood up from her station, walking over to where Alex and Greg were discussing the issue. Maybe we're looking at this the wrong way, she said. Instead of fixing what's broken, maybe we should test it in a different way. Instead of focusing on the full-scale system, let's create a smaller-scale, highly focused test. It won't be ideal, but it could give us enough data to bridge the gap. Alex turned to face her, considering the idea. What do you mean? We're already working with prototypes. A smaller test, though, could that really help us? It's not about replicating the full mission, Claire explained. It's about isolating the most crucial parts of the landing system, only the systems that absolutely must work to keep us alive. If we test those separately, we can get a clearer picture of what's working and what isn't, without trying to solve every problem at once. Alex thought for a moment. This wasn't the cleanest solution, but it might be the fastest. And right now, speed was their ally. All right, he said. Let's do it. But we need results within the next 48 hours. The clock is ticking. The next few days were a blur of chaotic, intense work. The team focused on creating the most simplified prototype possible, stripping away non-essential systems in order to isolate the core elements of the landing system that were most crucial to the success of the mission. They reran every diagnostic, recalibrated every sensor, and triple-checked the system's compatibility with the Martian environment. Despite the tension, Alex could sense that the team was beginning to rally around this new direction. There was something about focusing on the essentials that gave them a renewed sense of purpose. They weren't trying to solve everything at once anymore. They were going back to basics. And there was something oddly comforting about that. By the time the 48 hours had passed, the small-scale test prototype was ready. There were still flaws, there always would be, but Alex could feel a glimmer of hope beginning to shine through. They had a working system, a proof of concept. The data it provided wasn't perfect, but it was enough to identify key areas where they could improve. As Alex walked into the control room to debrief the team, he felt a mixture of exhaustion and optimism. It wasn't the victory he had hoped for, but it was something. "All right," Alex said, his voice steady. "We've got a working prototype, but we're not done yet. This test gave us the data we need to fix the most critical issues. We need to use that data to refine the system further. I'm not going to lie to you, this mission is still a long shot. But we've made progress. And that's enough for now." The team, though still on edge, nodded. They were in this together. There was no going back. "Let's get to work," Alex continued. "There's a lot left to do, and we don't have much time. But we've got one shot at this. And we're going to take it." As he finished speaking, Alex felt a shift in the room. It wasn't just about the technology anymore, it was about the team. They had come together through some of the toughest challenges any group of engineers could face. The clock was still ticking, but Alex knew one thing for sure, they were closer than ever to their goal. And for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism. Later that night, as Alex sat alone in his office, he stared at the screen in front of him. The data from the latest tests was still scrolling on the monitor, and he was lost in thought. There was so much work still to be done. But despite the mountain of obstacles ahead, Alex couldn't help but think about the bigger picture. He was on the verge of something truly groundbreaking. They were going to make it to Mars. It wasn't just a possibility anymore. It was a reality. There were still risks, of course, but there had always been risks. And he knew that if they could push through the next few challenges, they could finally achieve something no one else had ever done before. As the team worked tirelessly into the night, Alex finally allowed himself to close his eyes, just for a moment. Tomorrow would be another battle. But tonight? Tonight, they had made progress. The weight of the past few days had taken its toll. There was no denying it, the entire team was on edge, their nerves fraying with each passing hour. The race against time was becoming increasingly tense as the mission's launch window loomed closer. And despite their breakthroughs with the prototype landing system, the next challenge was just as daunting, perfecting the entire system and ensuring that everything would function in unison. The next few days would determine whether or not the mission was even possible. Alex sat in his office, staring at the endless lines of data streaming across the monitors. The numbers and equations were beginning to blur together. Despite the breakthroughs, there was always something, some detail, some tweak, that needed more attention. Nothing was ever truly perfect, and in space, that imperfection could mean disaster. A sharp knock at the door pulled Alex from his reverie. "Come in," Alex said, running a hand through his disheveled hair. It was Claire, her expression taut with concern. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her, her footsteps echoing slightly in the empty room. There was a moment of silence before she spoke, her voice soft but serious. "Alex, we need to talk." Alex nodded, setting aside the tablet in front of him. He knew this was coming. The tension had been building up for days, and Claire was not one to sugarcoat things. If there was a problem, she would bring it up, no matter how difficult the conversation. "What's going on?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. "It's about the landing system," Claire began, folding her arms across her chest. We've made progress, yes. But there's still a huge risk, and I don't think we've been honest with ourselves about it. Alex's stomach twisted. He could tell from the tone of her voice that this wasn't going to be an easy conversation. What are you saying? I'm saying we might be pushing this too hard, Claire continued. The system is showing improvement, but it's not enough. We've never tested the full system at this scale. And we're working with limited data. I know the pressure is enormous, but we're getting closer to the point where a failure is inevitable if we don't slow down and reassess. Alex's pulse quickened as the words sank in. He hadn't wanted to admit it, didn't want to even entertain the idea, but now it seemed undeniable. They were reaching the breaking point. We don't have the luxury of slowing down, Alex said, his voice tight. The launch window is closing, and the longer we wait, the harder it will be to pull this off. The whole mission is riding on this. I know, Claire replied, her voice softening. But if we push forward now, we risk making a critical mistake. We're at the edge, Alex. One wrong decision and everything we've worked for could be lost. Alex rubbed his eyes, feeling the weight of the decision bearing down on him. The mission was everything. It was their shot at greatness, their chance to make history. But at what cost? Was he willing to gamble everything, including the safety of the crew, just to meet a deadline? The thought gnawed at him. I get it, Alex said after a long pause. But what are we supposed to do? We've already come this far. Claire took a deep breath. I'm not saying we abandon the mission. I'm saying we need to make some tough calls. Maybe we need to push the timeline back, take the extra time to refine the system. It might cost us the opportunity to be first, but it might be the only way to guarantee success. I can't in good conscience risk everything without giving us more time to perfect it. Alex looked at her, searching for something, anything, that might make the decision easier. But the truth was, Claire was right. The mission could be a monumental failure if they weren't careful. They could lose everything, not just the mission, but the reputation they had worked so hard to build. But there was no turning back. The pressure from above, from Elon and the stakeholders, was relentless. If they missed the window, it would be a blow that they might never recover from. He stood up, pacing back and forth. We don't have that option, Claire. The world is watching. Elon is watching. I can't afford to be the one who slows this down. I won't be the one who holds everyone back. Alex, Claire began, her voice shaking slightly. No, Claire. I have to do this. I have to see it through. If it fails, it's on me. But I have to take that risk. Claire watched him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt. There was none. Okay, she said softly. But don't say I didn't warn you. With that, she turned and left the room, the door closing behind her with a soft click. The next few days were a blur of final preparations, relentless testing, and repeated tweaks to the landing system. The team worked around the clock, pushing themselves to the brink. The pressure was building to unbearable levels, and the fatigue began to show in the faces of everyone in the control room. There was no more time for second-guessing. They were committed now, no matter what. Alex spent every waking hour poring over data, running diagnostics, and overseeing the final adjustments. He couldn't afford to miss anything. There was too much at stake. But despite the intensity of the work, there was a gnawing feeling in the pit of his stomach. The pressure was suffocating, and he wondered if they were truly ready. At one point, as he walked through the lab, he found himself standing before the mock-up of the Mars landing system. The massive, intricate machinery seemed like an impenetrable fortress, one that could either carry them to glory or destroy everything they had worked for. Alex stared at it for a long time, trying to mentally prepare for the mission ahead. Are we ready? He whispered to himself, the question hanging in the air like a cloud. But even as he asked it, he knew the answer. They would never be truly ready. The unknowns were too vast, the risks too high. But they had no choice but to proceed. They were already on the edge. There was no turning back. The day of the final test arrived. The entire team gathered in the control room, the atmosphere thick with tension. Everyone knew what was at stake. Alex stood at the front, his face a mask of concentration. "All right," he said, his voice firm, "this is it. The final test. We've done everything we can to ensure this works. Let's make history." The countdown began, and Alex felt his heart race as the seconds ticked away. The room was silent, every eye focused on the monitors, waiting for the outcome. The engineers watched the data, the numbers, the tests, praying for success. And then it happened. The system engaged perfectly. The landing sequence initiated without a hitch. The simulated Mars surface appeared on the screen, and the craft descended slowly, steadily, without issue. For the first time in days, Alex felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The system was working. They had done it. As the test completed successfully, the control room erupted into cheers. There were high fives, laughter, and expressions of relief as the team realized they had overcome the impossible. But for Alex, the victory felt bittersweet. They had succeeded, yes, but the mission was far from over. Now, it was about executing on a much larger scale, getting the rocket to Mars, landing it safely, and bringing the crew back. And as they celebrated, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking a razor-thin line. The mission had just begun, and the real battle was yet to come. The days leading up to the final launch were eerily quiet. The noise and chaos of the lab, once filled with constant debate and the hum of machines, had quieted down to a more contemplative atmosphere. The frantic rush of innovation had given way to meticulous final checks, and now the only sound in the control room was the occasional murmur of a technician, typing away or making minor adjustments. For Alex, the wait was almost unbearable. The launch window was approaching faster than he cared to admit, and with each passing hour, the pressure seemed to grow heavier. The team had done everything they could to ensure the landing system was perfected, but he couldn't help but wonder, what if it wasn't enough? He stood by the window in his office, staring at the sprawling campus outside. The world felt far away. In just a few days, everything would change, one way or another. He thought about the crew waiting for the mission, about the eyes of the world that would be watching when the rocket launched. He thought about Elon Musk, his boss and mentor, whose faith in him had remained unshaken throughout this entire journey. But no matter how much support Alex had, the burden of this mission was on his shoulders. If it failed, all of them would carry the weight of the loss. Could I live with that? The sound of the door opening behind him broke his reverie. "You're brooding again," Claire said, stepping into the room, her voice light but carrying a hint of concern. Alex turned and managed a small smile. "I'm not brooding. Just thinking." Claire crossed the room and stood next to him at the window, both of them looking out at the twilight sky. The stars were starting to appear, tiny pinpricks of light in the deepening dark. "I get it," Claire said softly. "We've been through so much, and now it's all coming down to this. But you know, sometimes, you just have to trust the process. You've done everything you could. The team has done everything they could." "I know," Alex said, though he didn't feel it. He turned away from the window and walked over to his desk. "But that doesn't stop the nagging feeling that we missed something. That something we didn't account for will show up at the worst possible moment." "That's a natural fear," Claire replied, her tone patient. "But you're not alone in this. We've built a team, Alex. If there's something we missed, we'll figure it out together. That's what we do." Alex looked at her. She was right, of course. But somehow, the fear still clawed at him. "I just keep thinking about how much is riding on this," Alex said, his voice barely above a whisper. "How many people are counting on us? How many lives will be affected by what happens next?" Claire nodded, understanding. "We all feel it. But the reality is, you're ready. We're ready. It's not about being perfect, it's about doing your best and trusting that the rest will follow. We've done our best. The rest is out of our hands. Alex exhaled slowly, letting her words settle in his mind. It was hard to let go, to release the control that had defined every moment of his professional life. But Claire was right. They had done everything they could. And now, all they could do was wait. Thanks, Claire, Alex said, his voice steady now. You're right. We've done everything we could. It's time to let the work speak for itself. Claire smiled, relieved to see some of the tension easing from Alex's shoulders. That's the spirit. Now go get some rest. The launch is coming up, and you'll need your energy. Alex hesitated. Rest. I don't know if I can. You can, she replied firmly. And you will. Trust me, it's important. The night before the launch, the entire team gathered in the control room for one last briefing. It was a surreal moment. The feeling in the room was palpable, an overwhelming sense of anticipation mixed with a silent understanding that the next few hours could change everything. Alex stood at the front, watching the team as they all filed in, some chatting quietly, others looking as tense as he felt. They were ready, yes, but no one could deny the uncertainty that hung in the air. There was so much riding on this. One slip-up, one unforeseen variable, could derail everything. All right, team, Alex began, his voice calm but carrying the weight of their shared responsibility. I know the pressure's been immense. But we've done everything we can. We've prepared for every scenario, we've tested and retested. Now, we go out there and we do what we do best. We make history. This is our time. A quiet murmur of agreement spread across the room. Alex took a deep breath before continuing. The road to this moment hasn't been easy. We've faced obstacles that would have turned most people away. But not us. Not this team. We've come through every challenge, every setback, and now we're here, on the verge of something that no one has ever done before. So remember, no matter what happens out there, we've already accomplished something incredible. We've come this far because we believe in each other. We've got this. A round of applause followed his words, the room swelling with energy. It wasn't the same kind of cheer you'd expect before a big game. It wasn't that kind of enthusiasm. This was a quieter, deeper sense of camaraderie, a group of people who knew the magnitude of what they were about to attempt and had come together to make it happen. Alex nodded to his team. Let's make history. As the team dispersed to their stations, Alex stood in the center of the room, watching as the engineers and technicians began their final checks. The launch sequence had already begun, and in a few short hours, the rocket would be launched into space, heading for Mars. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and Alex took it out, seeing the message from Elon. You've got this, Alex. The world is watching, and I believe in you. We're all behind you. Alex stared at the message for a moment, his fingers hovering over the screen. There was no escaping the enormity of the task before him. But then he typed back, "Thank you, Elon. We won't let you down." He pocketed the phone, looking around the room one last time. The calm before the storm. The rocket stood on the launch pad, towering over the desert landscape. The sky had already darkened, the stars twinkling above, as though the universe itself was watching. The control room was filled with the buzz of last-minute checks, the sound of keyboards clacking, and the soft hum of machinery. Alex stood by the large monitor in the corner of the room, his eyes locked on the countdown clock. 10 minutes. The air in the room felt thick with anticipation. Despite the calm, Alex could feel the tension building. It was the quiet before the storm, the calm before everything would change. Are we good to go? Claire asked, stepping up beside him, her voice steady but with an underlying tension. Everything's green, Alex replied, glancing over the monitors. All systems are operational. It's go time. As the countdown continued, Alex's mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. But for now, there was nothing left to do but watch. They had done everything they could. The mission was about to begin. And everything they had worked for would either soar to new heights, or come crashing down in an instant. The moment the countdown clock hit 0, the room erupted into chaos. The nerves, the anticipation, the endless hours of testing and preparation all culminated in this single instant. Alex stood at the control center, watching the monitor as the rocket's engines roared to life. His pulse quickened as the massive spacecraft began its slow but unstoppable ascent. "Lift off," someone shouted from the back of the room. The voice was lost in the rush of cheers that followed. But Alex could only focus on one thing, the rocket, as it cut through the atmosphere, its tail of fire lighting up the night sky. It had been years of work, countless sleepless nights, thousands of calculations, and infinite risks. Now it was real. They were truly on their way to Mars. "Check all systems." Alex barked, his voice cutting through the excitement. His eyes remained locked on the screen, watching the various feeds from the rocket. He had learned to compartmentalize his emotions, to stay calm under pressure. But inside, a wild mixture of exhilaration and dread churned within him. He was watching history unfold, but with each passing second, the reality of the mission's magnitude settled more heavily on his shoulders. "Everything's green, Alex. We're on course," a technician confirmed, his voice steady despite the excitement in the room. Alex exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, his mind already racing to the next phase of the operation. The launch had gone smoothly, but this was just the beginning. They still had to reach Mars, navigate its gravity, and land. There was no room for error. "We've made it through the first step," Alex said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But we've still got a long way to go." The team watched the monitors in rapt attention, eyes glued to the telemetry and tracking systems. The rocket's trajectory was perfect, the systems functioning flawlessly. And yet, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The calm of the control room, the precision of the data, seemed like the calm before an even bigger storm. As the hours passed and the rocket moved further into space, the tension only increased. With each minute that passed, the reality of the mission set in more firmly. This wasn't just a test anymore. This was the real thing. Alex's mind kept drifting back to the final test, the moments when they had been so close to failure. But now, as the spacecraft pushed further from Earth, he felt something different, an unsettling peace, almost like the eye of a storm. The mission had been launched, and there was no going back. "Alex," Claire said, pulling him from his thoughts. She was standing next to him, her expression calm but alert. "We're good for the next phase. The landing sequence is ready." Alex nodded. It was time to prepare for the hardest part of the mission, the descent. Mars' gravity was weaker than Earth's, but the landscape was treacherous, filled with craggy mountains, vast plains, and deep valleys. They had prepared for every scenario, and yet, there was always the nagging thought that something unforeseen would happen. Back at the Mission Control Center, the next few hours passed in a blur of calculations, updates, and last-minute checks. As the rocket neared Mars, the entire team seemed to hold their breath. The journey to this point had been long and arduous, but now, it felt like time was moving at an agonizing crawl. 5 minutes to entry, a voice crackled through the intercom, and the tension in the room escalated. Every technician, every engineer, was glued to their stations, each one waiting for the critical moment when the spacecraft would enter the Martian atmosphere. "Alex, we're good for the entry burn," Claire said, her face lit up by the glow of the monitor in front of her. "Everything checks out." Alex gave a sharp nod, his eyes scanning the team around him. This was it. The rocket had to perform a precise atmospheric entry maneuver, and if it failed, the mission would be compromised. "Initiate entry burn," Alex ordered. The room fell silent as the countdown for the burn began. A hush of expectation filled the air. The entry burn was designed to slow the spacecraft down enough so that it wouldn't disintegrate from the heat of entering Mars' atmosphere, but there was always a risk. One wrong move, and they would lose it all. Seconds passed like hours. Sweat beaded on Alex's forehead as the entry burn engaged. He watched the telemetry closely, holding his breath, as the spacecraft's speed decreased, its systems working overtime to ensure a controlled descent. "Telemetry is green," someone called out, and the relief that washed over the room was palpable. They had made it through the most dangerous phase of the mission. But they were not out of the woods yet. "Now, prepare for landing sequence," Alex said, though his voice sounded almost mechanical. He was trying to control the growing sense of dread in his chest. This was what they had been working for, but what if something unexpected happened? What if it wasn't enough? As the spacecraft descended toward the Martian surface, Alex's focus shifted entirely to the landing system. The innovative prototype they had built, with its precision-guided thrusters and advanced landing gear, had been tested 100 times over. But this was the real test. This was the point where all their hard work, all their preparation, would either pay off or be swept away in failure. The control room was electric with tension as the rocket neared its final approach. The landing gear deployed, and the spacecraft slowly, steadily, began to touch down on the red, rocky surface of Mars. "Touchdown confirmed," someone shouted, and the room burst into a cacophony of cheers and claps. Alex stood frozen for a long moment, his heart racing. It wasn't until the roar of celebration filled the room that he allowed himself to let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alex said, his voice firm but filled with emotion, "we have successfully landed on Mars." There was a moment of stunned silence before the control room erupted in applause. They had done it. Against all odds, they had succeeded. They had made history. But as Alex watched his team celebrate, he knew that the work wasn't over. This was just the beginning. There was still so much to do, so much to explore. And now, more than ever, the world would be watching them. The hardest part of the mission may have been completed, but the true journey had just begun. The Martian landscape stretched out before them like a vast, barren desert, a quiet, eerie expanse of red dust and rocky terrain, stretching as far as the eye could see. The spacecraft had landed smoothly, and now, standing on the threshold of a new world, Alex and his team were about to take their first steps onto a planet that had only existed in their imaginations until now. The control room back on Earth buzzed with excitement as the cameras inside the landing module transmitted live footage of the crew preparing for the first-ever human footsteps on Mars. But even in the midst of that excitement, Alex felt a strange calm. The noise and chaos of the mission had faded into the background, replaced by a solemn quietness. There was no turning back now. They had made history, but the real work, the true mission, was just beginning. "Alex, are you ready?" Claire's voice crackled through his earpiece, breaking the silence in his mind. He looked around the cabin, at the faces of the crew, every one of them an expert in their field, yet all of them a little wide-eyed as they prepared to make history. The landing had gone flawlessly, but the true test was still ahead. They had come here to explore, to learn, and to prove that humanity could survive and thrive on another planet. And while the technology and the training had prepared them for this moment, there was no predicting what they would face once they stepped outside. "Yeah," Alex replied, his voice steady, though his hands trembled ever so slightly. "I'm ready." It wasn't just the enormity of the task that weighed on his shoulders. It was the reality that he was standing at the beginning of something that would forever alter the course of history. Every discovery they made on Mars, every step forward, would have implications that rippled through the world for generations to come. The hatch opened with a soft hiss, the red Martian dust swirling gently outside. The harsh sunlight of Mars, filtered through the thin atmosphere, cast long shadows over the barren landscape. The crew filed out one by one, their boots crunching against the Martian surface. When Alex's boot finally made contact with the red soil, it felt surreal. He stood there for a moment, looking around, not quite believing what he was seeing. Mars. They had made it. It was real. First steps on Mars, Alex muttered under his breath, taking a deep breath, as though he could somehow inhale the significance of the moment. He looked up at the sky, no blue to be seen, only a dim, orange-tinted expanse of space. There were no clouds here, no weather. Just the unrelenting silence and the endless stretch of Martian terrain. It felt strangely empty, as though this place had been waiting for them to arrive. "Look at this," Claire said from beside him, her voice filled with awe. "It's everything we've dreamed of." But the awe was short-lived. Alex quickly refocused, reminding himself of the importance of their mission. They had to get to work. They had to explore, gather data, and most importantly, ensure their survival. Mars was not a welcoming place. It was harsh, unforgiving, and every step they took carried risks. "All right, team," Alex said, his voice now taking on a more authoritative tone. "We're not here to marvel at the view. We're here to work. Claire, check the habitat systems. Make sure we're good for the long-term stay. Dave, begin the surface scans. Let's start gathering data. And I'll begin setting up the rover for exploration." The team immediately began moving into action, the tension of the moment shifting from awe to focused determination. They had done everything to prepare for this mission, but the reality was always different than the simulation. Every action from now on would be critical. Hours passed as the crew worked tirelessly to set up the temporary habitat, deploy the rover, and start gathering initial data. The atmosphere in the control room back on Earth was a mix of excitement and anxiety. Everyone knew how fragile their position was. The rover had to be deployed correctly to ensure that it could collect samples and perform its geological scans. The habitat had to be airtight and functional, as their survival on Mars depended on it. Alex was running final checks on the rover when Claire approached him, her face serious. "Alex, we've got an issue," she said, holding up a tablet showing a series of data points. "The habitat's oxygen system is fluctuating. The pressure's dropping slightly, and we're seeing some instability in the atmosphere controls." Alex's heart skipped a beat. The habitat was their lifeline on Mars. If it failed, everything would be at risk. "Is it a system error, or is there a physical leak?" Alex asked, his mind racing through potential solutions. "We're not sure yet," Claire replied, her voice tight with worry. "I'm running diagnostics now, but it could be a malfunction with the environmental controls." Alex cursed under his breath. This was the last thing they needed. With all the unknowns that came with exploring Mars, the last thing they could afford was a failure in their life support systems. "All right, keep me updated," Alex said. "I'll come check it out in person." He turned and walked briskly toward the habitat module, his thoughts swirling. It had been too easy so far. The rocket launch had gone perfectly. The landing was smooth. But now, Mars was reminding them that nothing would be given to them easily. The habitat module was silent except for the low hum of the systems working to regulate the air, the temperature, and the water. Alex stepped inside, immediately noticing the difference in pressure. It wasn't much, just a slight difference in the air that made his ears pop, but it was enough to make his instincts flare. Claire was already at the console, running diagnostics and typing rapidly on the screen. "I've isolated the issue," she said without looking up. "It's the filtration system. A minor fault in the oxygen scrubbers. It's not life-threatening, but if we don't fix it soon, it could compromise the environment." "Can we repair it?" Alex asked, moving closer to the console. "We should be able to. We have the parts for a temporary fix. It'll hold for now, but we'll need to replace the scrubbers fully when we can. I'll make the repairs immediately." "Good. Let me know when it's done," Alex replied, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't a catastrophic failure. They could fix this. He turned back to the door, but as he stepped out, he was struck by the gravity of their situation. The repairs were a temporary fix, and even though they had anticipated many potential issues, this was Mars. The unknown was always lurking, and for the first time since landing, Alex felt the weight of that uncertainty pressing down on him. As night fell on Mars, the team gathered back inside the habitat, the first day of their historic mission behind them. The Martian sky was still a dim shade of orange, the stars just barely visible through the thin atmosphere. They sat around a small table, eating their rations and sharing quiet conversation. "We've made it this far," Dave said, breaking the silence. "But we still have a long road ahead of us. What do you think is out there?" Alex paused, looking around at his team. "I think we've only scratched the surface. Mars has more to offer than we can even imagine. But we'll find it, one step at a time." The team nodded in agreement, the quiet murmurs of the night settling in around them. Mars was silent, distant, but it was also full of possibilities. They had come here to explore, to discover, and to make history. And now, the real adventure was about to begin. The following morning, a cold Martian wind swept across the barren landscape. The sun had barely risen, its light casting long, eerie shadows over the alien terrain. Inside the habitat module, Alex and his team were already awake, suited up, and ready to start their second day on Mars. The initial excitement of their landing had already started to wear off. They were no longer tourists on Mars, they were explorers, scientists, and engineers with a mission. Their work was real now. The problems they faced were more than theoretical, they were life and death. "All right, team," Alex said as he checked his equipment, making sure everything was in place. "Today, we're going to deploy the rover and begin our first real surface exploration. The goal is to collect samples, identify key geological features, and start mapping out the area around us. We're not just looking for rocks, we're looking for answers." Claire was already busy at the control panel, adjusting the rover's systems. "We're ready to go. All systems are go on my end. I've mapped out a preliminary route for the rover, so we should be able to cover a good distance today." Alex nodded. "Great. Let's get to work." Stepping out of the habitat, Alex felt the weight of the Martian atmosphere again. Even though the helmet protected him from the frigid air, there was something unsettling about the emptiness of it all. Mars felt like a place that had been forgotten by time, a place untouched by human hands for billions of years. The rover, a sleek, metallic machine designed for exploration, was waiting just outside the habitat. It was an impressive piece of technology, equipped with a variety of sensors and tools to gather data from the Martian surface. Its wheels sank slightly into the soft red soil as Alex approached. Claire and Dave were already setting up the rover, calibrating its instruments and preparing it for its first journey across the Martian plains. The air was thick with the static of their communications, their voices crackling through the headsets as they worked. "Alex, we're all set here," Claire called over to him, her voice muffled by the helmet's communication system. "You ready to go?" Alex took one last look at the landscape. "Let's do this." They climbed into the rover's cockpit, strapping themselves into their seats. It wasn't the most comfortable ride, they'd been trained for this, but nothing could have prepared them for the feeling of actually driving the rover across Mars. It was a strange mixture of surrealism and excitement, the vast, empty planet stretching out before them, with nothing but their vehicle between them and the unknown. "Remember, we're here to map as much of the terrain as we can," Alex said, his hands steady on the controls. "We need as much data as possible before we make any more decisions on where to send the habitat and other equipment." The rover's wheels rumbled as it began to move. Slowly at first, it crawled across the Martian landscape, its sensors pinging and recording every aspect of the terrain. Alex could see the ridges of ancient valleys, the rocks that had been shaped by millennia of Martian winds. It was like stepping into another world entirely, one that had its own stories to tell. As they drove, Alex couldn't help but think about what might be hidden beneath the surface. Could there be signs of ancient life here? What secrets did Mars hold, waiting to be uncovered? Hours passed as the rover covered ground. The terrain seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, each part of the surface looking nearly identical to the last. The monotony of the landscape began to set in, and Alex found himself growing uneasy. It wasn't the kind of unease that came from fear, it was the discomfort of knowing that they were in a place where nothing lived. The planet had once been alive, once had water, an atmosphere, perhaps even life. But now it was nothing but dust and rocks. "Let's take a reading here," Claire said, breaking Alex's thoughts. "I want to test the soil composition. I found some odd readings." Alex nodded and parked the rover. The area was undisturbed, with a fine dust coating the rocks and surface, almost like a thin layer of powder. Claire set to work with the rover's tools, gathering samples of the soil and scanning for any trace elements or compounds that might indicate past life. "Nothing unusual yet," Claire said after a few minutes, glancing over the data. "But we need to go deeper to get a clearer picture." Alex gave her a tight smile. "We've got time." Just as Claire was about to gather another sample, the ground beneath them trembled. It was a subtle movement at first, nothing that felt like an earthquake, but enough to catch their attention. "What the hell was that?" Dave asked, looking around the horizon. Alex froze, his senses heightening. The tremor wasn't something they had anticipated. There was no seismic activity planned for Mars, at least, none that they had studied in depth. They'd known about dust storms and the occasional weather anomaly, but this was something different. Another tremor followed, slightly stronger this time. Alex gripped the controls of the rover, his instincts kicking in. "Get inside the rover." "Now," he ordered. They didn't need to be told twice. Claire and Dave scrambled to get back into the rover as quickly as possible, and Alex slammed the doors shut once they were all inside. The ground beneath them shuddered once more, and the rover's lights flickered. For a brief moment, the communication system went down, and Alex's heart skipped a beat. Come on," he muttered, frantically trying to reset the rover's systems. Just as quickly as it had happened, the tremors ceased. The rover was stable again, but the unease remained. The Martian surface was eerily quiet now, almost as though the planet itself had gone still in the aftermath of something unseen. "What do you think that was?" Dave asked, his voice tight with concern. Alex stared out the rover's window, scanning the horizon. The land was silent, the only movement coming from the occasional swirl of dust. But something was off. The air felt thick, almost charged. "I don't know," Alex said, his voice calm but unsure. "But we need to find out." Back at the habitat, Alex briefed the team about the strange tremors. The mission had not accounted for any seismic activity, and there were no immediate explanations in the data they had gathered. "We need to be cautious," Alex said, his voice steady despite the concern growing inside him. "If this is the beginning of something bigger, we need to be prepared." Claire nodded. "We'll need to increase our seismic monitoring, but right now, I think the priority is to make sure everything is stable. The habitat, the rover, and our life support systems are the most important." Alex agreed, but as he looked out at the Martian horizon, a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that something had just shifted. Mars wasn't as quiet and empty as it seemed. There was more to this planet than they had expected, and the unknowns were beginning to surface. The team spent the rest of the day running diagnostics and making sure the rover and habitat systems were fully functional. The tremors had been a strange anomaly, but Alex couldn't help feeling like they had just scraped the surface of something larger. Mars had a way of keeping its secrets, and he had a feeling that the deeper they dug, the more they would uncover. As night fell and the Martian landscape grew quiet again, Alex stood at the habitat's observation window, staring out into the vastness. Mars was silent, yes. But the silence was not empty. It was pregnant with mystery, and Alex knew that they had only just begun to peel back the layers of this ancient world. And somewhere, deep beneath the surface, something was waiting. The quiet, eerie stillness of Mars had returned after the tremors, but the unease in the air lingered. Alex stood in front of the rover's data screen, scrutinizing the seismic readings. There was no official explanation for the strange tremors they'd felt earlier, but he wasn't convinced that they were natural. The lack of any warning signs, coupled with the eerie timing of the incident, kept his mind spinning. "Alex, you need to see this," Claire's voice crackled in his earpiece, breaking his thoughts. He took one last look at the rover's logs, then quickly made his way to the habitat's control center. When he entered, Claire was standing beside the main monitor, her eyes wide with concern. "What's going on?" Alex asked, his pulse quickening. "Take a look," Claire replied, pointing to the screen. The monitor displayed the latest seismic readings they had gathered. For the past few hours, the systems had remained stable, but the graph on the screen suddenly spiked again, much higher than any of the previous tremors. It was as though the ground was shifting beneath them, like something deep below Mars' crust was moving. "I thought we were done with these after the first couple," Alex said. "But this one's different. It's stronger." Claire nodded, her face pale. "It's not just a tremor. The data's showing something else, something large moving underground." Alex's thoughts immediately jumped to the worst-case scenario. Was there some sort of geological event taking place? Or was it something more sinister? Mars had a long history of earthquakes and tectonic activity, but nothing to this scale. Not that they knew of, anyway. "Do you think it's related to the fault lines?" Alex asked, although the question already seemed inadequate. "No way to tell yet," Claire replied. "We need more data. But this is unlike anything we've seen. And we have no way of predicting when the next event will hit, or how big it'll be." Alex rubbed his temples, trying to make sense of the situation. He'd trained for months for Mars, for the thrill of exploration, for the scientific discovery that could change humanity's future. But he hadn't trained for this. The unknown, the unexplained, the kind of event that no amount of preparation could have prepared him for. "What's our plan?" he asked, trying to remain calm. "We need to stay inside the habitat for now," Claire said. "We can't take risks with the rover or any of the equipment. If this is an indication of something bigger coming, we need to hunker down and wait it out. I'll keep monitoring the seismic activity, but we can't predict when or if it'll happen again." The team spent the rest of the day in tense silence, with Claire running diagnostics, Dave rechecking the structural integrity of the habitat, and Alex pacing, his thoughts racing. They were prepared for a mission to explore and gather data, but not for what Mars might throw at them now. The Martian evening came quickly, casting long shadows over the terrain outside. Inside the habitat, there was an overwhelming sense of urgency, yet they had no idea what they were facing. "I can't get a good read on this," Claire said, her voice strained. "The data's all over the place. I'm seeing fluctuating temperatures, minor tremors, and irregular pressure readings from the surface." "What do you mean, irregular?" Alex asked, leaning over her shoulder to get a better look at the screen. "I mean," Claire continued, "these readings don't match anything we've anticipated. Mars is a planet of extremes, but what we're seeing now feels wrong. Like the conditions are actively changing beneath us." Alex took a deep breath. "So you're saying the surface could be unstable?" "I'm not sure," Claire replied. "But there's definitely something going on that we didn't expect. It's almost like the ground is alive." Alex wasn't sure how to respond. The word seemed too large, too far-fetched. He had heard all the theories about Mars, how it had once had a warm climate, rivers, oceans, maybe even life, but this was beyond anything he'd imagined. Was it possible there was something beneath the surface of Mars that they weren't prepared for? "All right," Alex said, after a long silence. "Let's focus on keeping the habitat secure and continue monitoring the surface. If these anomalies keep escalating, we might need to evacuate to the rover and get out of here for a while." Dave, who had been sitting quietly, spoke up. "But what if we're dealing with something that could be dangerous? What if the tremors are just the beginning?" The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. The thought had crossed Alex's mind too. What if Mars had secrets they were never meant to discover? What if there was a force beneath the surface, something that could jeopardize their mission, and their lives? "We'll figure it out," Alex said firmly, although doubt crept into his own voice. "But we can't panic. Not yet. Let's stay calm, stick to the plan, and gather as much data as we can. That night, as the team lay in their sleeping bags, the oppressive silence of Mars outside pressed against the habitat walls. The ground still felt strangely restless beneath them, the occasional vibration reminding them of the unseen force lurking below the surface. Alex tossed and turned, unable to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Mars wasn't supposed to be like this. The images they'd seen, the data they'd gathered, all suggested a planet frozen in time, ancient, quiet, dead. But what if it wasn't? What if Mars still had a pulse, a life force, something that had never truly died? His mind kept racing, every scenario playing out in his head. What if there were underground caverns that had remained hidden for millions of years? What if there were pockets of volatile gases, or even, no, it was too far-fetched, what if there was something living beneath the surface? But as the hours ticked by, he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that the tremors, the data, the weird readings, all of it meant something more. Mars wasn't just an empty world. It wasn't just a place to explore. It was hiding something, something they were not meant to find. And the worst part? Alex didn't know if they were prepared to face it. The next morning, the crew gathered again in the habitat's central chamber, the tension palpable. Claire and Dave were monitoring the seismic data as usual, but there was a new sense of urgency to their work. The readings from the previous day had grown even more erratic. "I've been looking at this for hours," Claire said, her voice tight. "The ground keeps shifting, almost in patterns. Whatever's happening beneath the surface isn't random. It's as if something is moving, something with purpose." Alex frowned. "Are you saying there's something alive down there?" "I'm not sure," Claire replied, glancing up from her monitor. "But whatever it is, we need to find out. If we don't, we risk losing control of the situation entirely." Alex took a deep breath, trying to steady his thoughts. The mission had just become much more complicated than they had ever prepared for. They hadn't come to Mars to uncover mysteries buried in the planet's depths, but it looked like that was exactly what was happening. "All right," Alex said, his voice calm but resolute. "We need to stay focused. Claire, keep monitoring the seismic activity. Dave, check the rover's systems, we might need to make another run. We're not going to let this planet defeat us. We're going to uncover the truth." The team nodded, their determination rising, but deep down, Alex knew that the questions they were asking now weren't ones they could answer with just science and data. Something more was at play, something that Mars had been hiding for millennia. And no matter what, they would find it. The question was, could they survive the truth? The morning light barely filtered through the habitat's reinforced windows, casting long, cold shadows on the walls. Inside, the atmosphere felt heavier than it had in previous days. The team's unease had turned into quiet, focused determination. There were no more discussions about what might be wrong with Mars, now it was simply a matter of uncovering the truth. Alex paced slowly around the habitat, his mind racing with possibilities. What exactly was happening beneath them? The tremors were growing in intensity and frequency, and now they seemed to follow some kind of pattern. It was no longer just an anomaly, Mars was changing, or rather, something beneath the surface was. And whatever it wasn't waiting for them to figure it out. "Alex," Claire's voice cut through his thoughts. "You need to see this." He turned sharply toward her workstation, his pulse quickening. Claire had been keeping a close watch on the seismic data, trying to understand the strange behavior beneath their feet. "What is it?" Alex asked, walking toward her. Claire stood at the monitor, her face tense. "I've been tracking the tremors, and something's different. Look at the patterns. They're not just random anymore. It's like, something is moving down there." Alex stepped closer to the screen. The data readout was almost hypnotic, rhythmic, methodical. There was no longer any question that it was the same seismic disturbance continuing beneath them. But now, the tremors appeared to be aligned in regular intervals, moving in a clear direction. "That's not natural," Alex muttered. Whatever's down there, it's purposeful. Claire nodded. Exactly. And there's more. The readings suggest that whatever is creating these tremors is growing in size. It's as if the core of Mars is reacting to something down there, like it's shifting its position or responding to external forces. Alex's heart skipped a beat. Are you saying that something's alive down there? Something that's triggering this? I don't know, Claire replied, her voice tense. But the data seems to suggest that Mars isn't just an empty planet anymore. There's something, or someone, stirring beneath us. Alex took a deep breath. It was one thing to deal with the uncertainty of unexplored terrain. But now, the thought that Mars could be harboring something alive, something with purpose, had turned their mission into something far darker, more dangerous. Do we have enough to go on? Alex asked, his voice quiet but determined. Is it safe to investigate further? Claire hesitated, her fingers dancing over the control panel. I'm not sure. The seismic activity is getting stronger, and I'm seeing fluctuations in the magnetic field as well. Whatever it is down there, it's not just moving, it's changing something deep in the planet. Alex looked at the readings again. They were steadily climbing, indicating something was shifting, expanding, possibly even emerging. He had read about the theories, about Mars' ancient past, the possibilities of underground water systems, the potential for microbial life, but this was different. This wasn't the stuff of textbooks. This was real. All right, Alex said, pulling himself together. We need to get more data. We have to know what we're dealing with, even if that means getting closer to the source of these tremors. Claire looked at him with concern. Alex, I have to warn you, the deeper we go, the more unstable it could become. If we're not careful. I know, Alex interrupted. But we need to understand what's happening. We can't just sit here and wait for it to come to us. We have to take the first step. The team prepped quickly, suiting up and gathering the necessary tools. They knew the risks. They had all been trained for dangerous situations, but this was something entirely different. They weren't just exploring a barren world anymore, they were diving headfirst into a mystery that was bigger than any of them. Outside, the Martian wind howled, sending dust spiraling across the barren landscape. It was a haunting reminder of how desolate and unforgiving this planet could be. But it was also a call to action. No matter how harsh Mars was, Alex and his team had come here to uncover its secrets. And now, it seemed those secrets were pushing back. The rover was ready. As Alex climbed inside, the familiar hum of the machine's systems helped calm his nerves. Claire and Dave followed, their faces grim. I've mapped out a route, Claire said, her voice steady. We'll head east for about 10 clicks, where the seismic data suggests the epicenter is located. That's where the tremors are coming from. Let's move out, Alex said. The rover moved slowly at first, its wheels crunching the rocky Martian soil. The silence outside was unnerving, broken only by the occasional squeal of the rover's sensors as it adjusted its position. As they drove, Alex couldn't help but think about the implications of what they were doing. They were heading toward the unknown. Toward something that could be more dangerous. Hours passed as they traveled farther east, the landscape shifting from rocky ridges to vast, sweeping plains of dust and red dirt. The terrain outside was flat and barren, making it hard to judge how far they had actually come. We're getting close, Claire said, eyes glued to the monitor. The tremors are definitely coming from somewhere beneath us. Alex felt his stomach twist with nervous anticipation. They were close to the epicenter now, closer than ever. The ground was beginning to feel more unstable, as though the very surface beneath them was preparing for something. The rover's engines hummed low as it rumbled across the terrain, the only sound besides the whistling wind. Alex felt his heart pounding in his chest. Was it the fear of the unknown? Or something more primal, a deep instinct telling him that they were about to come face to face with something they weren't meant to find? There, Dave said suddenly, pointing ahead. Alex followed his gaze, his heart skipping. In the distance, a large, jagged rock formation rose up from the plains, an outcropping of stone, the likes of which hadn't been seen anywhere else around them. It looked almost unnatural in its symmetry, as though it had been shaped or moved by something, or someone, purposeful. The seismic data was off the charts now. It was coming from beneath this formation. "We need to stop here," Alex said, his voice tight. "This is where the source is. Let's get out and investigate." They disembarked from the rover, the air outside cold and thin. The ground beneath them felt different now, soft, almost spongy in places. It was unsettling, like walking on a surface that wasn't quite solid. As they approached the rock formation, Alex felt an odd sense of foreboding. It was as if the rocks themselves were waiting, watching. The air was still, unnervingly so. "Okay, let's start taking readings," Alex instructed, pulling out a scanner from his pack. "Dave, check the ground. Claire, monitor the seismic data. I want to know what's going on down there." Claire nodded, her face pale but focused. As she set up her equipment, she turned to Alex. "You're sure about this, right?" He paused, looking at the formation ahead. "No. But we have to do this. We need answers." Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as they worked. The ground beneath their feet seemed to hum, a low vibration that increased with each passing second. It was no longer a tremor, it was a constant, rhythmic pulse. And then, as Alex's scanner beeped, the world seemed to shift. There was a deep rumble beneath them, louder than anything they'd experienced so far. It wasn't just the tremors, it was something massive, something that seemed to be awakening beneath the surface. The ground shook again, this time with greater force. Alex stumbled, his hand gripping the rock for stability. "I think it's happening," Claire said, her voice urgent. "It's coming to the surface." Alex's blood ran cold. There was no turning back now. The secret Mars had kept for millennia was about to reveal itself. The ground trembled once again, more violently this time. Alex barely had time to brace himself before the force of the tremor knocked him off balance. He stumbled but caught himself on a jagged rock, the pulse of seismic energy vibrating up through his boots. "Claire! Dave!" he shouted, his voice strained as he fought to stay upright. "Here!" Claire's voice came from the rover, barely audible over the roar of the tremor. "We need to get to cover." "No!" Alex yelled back, his heart pounding. "Stay here. We need to know what's causing this. We can't just run." The seismic readings were growing stronger, more intense, each pulse of the planet's deep vibrations resonating like a warning. The strange rock formation ahead, shaped like some ancient monolith, seemed to shimmer under the growing energy. The air felt thick, alive with static, as though the planet itself was holding its breath. "Something's happening," Dave said, coming up beside Alex. His face was pale, his eyes wide with apprehension. "What if we're in the middle of something dangerous?" Alex stared at the formation ahead, now illuminated by the flickering lights of their equipment. The air was growing colder, sharper, as if something deep below was pushing outward. "It's not just a tremor," Alex said, his voice quieter now. "Something is pushing its way to the surface. I think it's been here for a long time, something hidden beneath us, maybe even something alive." Claire's voice crackled through their comms. "Alex, get to safety now. Whatever is down there, it's awakening. I'm seeing massive fluctuations in the seismic activity. We don't know how much longer we have before it." She was cut off by a deafening roar, a rumble that seemed to echo from the very depths of the planet. The ground shook so violently that the team had to grab onto whatever they could to stay grounded. For a brief moment, everything went still. A silence so profound, it felt like the planet had exhaled a final breath. And then, from deep beneath the surface, came a sound. A low, rumbling growl, like the growl of something enormous awakening from eons of slumber. The vibrations beneath their feet intensified, the ground itself buckling as something massive shifted within the planet's crust. "Alex!" Claire shouted, her voice cracking with urgency. "We have to go now. This is beyond our control." Alex didn't need to hear any more. He spun on his heels, grabbing Dave by the arm and pulling him toward the rover. They had no time to waste. Whatever was underground, it was coming to the surface, and it was angry. They barely made it back to the rover before the ground shook again. This time, the tremors were so intense that the vehicle itself rattled, and the communications panel flickered with static. Claire was already at the controls, her face tight with fear. "Strap in, everyone," she shouted, eyes locked on the monitor as she began to accelerate the rover. "We need to get out of here, now." The landscape around them seemed to shift, as though the very ground was alive, twisting and warping under the pressure. The rocks themselves seemed to grow and shrink, the surface heaving as if something was clawing its way to freedom beneath them. But as they drove, the vibrations continued to intensify, the ground beneath them buckling and cracking with increasing frequency. Something massive was stirring below, something powerful enough to shake the entire Martian landscape. Alex glanced over at Claire, his face grim. "What are we dealing with? What could cause this kind of seismic event?" Claire's fingers flew over the controls, but her eyes were locked on the growing tremors outside. "I don't know. I've never seen anything like this. This isn't just a natural phenomenon. It's as if something is actively forcing its way through the crust. I'm not sure what we're up against, but we need to get to safety before it reaches us." The air inside the rover was thick with tension, every jolt of the vehicle's motion sending waves of dread through Alex's chest. They had no clear plan, no knowledge of what was about to happen. Their only hope was to outrun whatever was awakening beneath the planet's surface. As they continued their harrowing journey across the Martian landscape, the ground heaved and cracked with violent force, like the planet was tearing itself apart. The formations of rock around them seemed to be shifting, twisting in unnatural ways. The atmosphere outside grew colder, and the sky, once clear, now seemed to swirl with dust. Then, in an instant, it happened. A massive eruption tore through the ground several clicks ahead, sending a cloud of red dust and debris into the sky. The ground itself seemed to rupture like a great wound, and from the fissures came a terrifying sound, a roar so loud it shook the very air around them. It was as though Mars itself had opened its mouth and screamed into the heavens. Alex's heart stopped. "Get us out of here, Claire," he shouted, his voice raw with fear. The eruption was close, too close. They couldn't outrun it. The rover's engines roared as Claire pushed the throttle forward, desperately trying to gain speed. But the shock waves from the eruption sent ripples of energy through the air, forcing them to swerve and struggle for control. "We're not going to make it," Dave yelled from the back seat, his voice nearly drowned out by the noise of the eruption. "We have to," Alex shouted back. His mind raced with possibilities. What could cause such a massive eruption on Mars? Was it some kind of underground volcano? Or was it something else, something even more dangerous? The eruption continued, sending waves of dust and debris crashing toward them. In the distance, Alex saw the ground where they had been just moments ago split wide open, revealing a cavernous maw, dark and ominous. Whatever had been awakening beneath them was finally free. And it was coming for them. The rover finally broke through the worst of the dust cloud, the landscape ahead clear once more. But the vibrations hadn't stopped. The tremors were still there, more violent than ever, shaking the entire surface of Mars. "We need to get back to the habitat," Alex shouted, his voice grim. "It's the only place we'll have any chance of protection." "We're too far out," Claire retorted, her eyes fixed on the monitor. "The habitat's too far away. We'll never make it in time." "Then we'll have to hold up here," Alex said, his voice steady despite the panic gnawing at him. "Set up a defensive position. We need to stay out of range." But as the tremors continued, it was clear, there was nowhere to hide. Mars had become a battlefield, the surface itself tearing apart in front of them. The roar continued in the distance as the team huddled together inside the rover, knowing that whatever had been hidden beneath the surface of Mars was now awake, and coming for them. The question now was not if they could escape, but if they could survive what was coming next. The world outside the rover was a storm of dust, chaos, and destruction. The ground shook violently beneath them, each tremor more forceful than the last. Mars, once a silent, unyielding landscape, had transformed into a living nightmare, and Alex had no illusions about what was happening. Whatever had been hidden beneath the surface was now awake, and it wasn't showing any signs of stopping. "Claire, any chance we can get a reading on the source?" Alex shouted over the deafening noise of the shaking ground. Claire was hunched over the rover's control panel, her fingers frantically typing in commands, but the screens flickered erratically as if even the technology itself was struggling to maintain control. She looked up, her face pale and filled with anxiety. "I can't get a clear signal. The seismic activity is scrambling everything. The entire region is a massive wave of energy, pushing up from below," she said, her voice shaking. "We need to get back to the habitat. We're not safe out here." Alex's eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the eruption had torn open the planet's crust. The Earth still seemed to be bleeding, chunks of red soil and rock cascading into the sky. The once stable surface of Mars was coming apart, and the immense power that had been dormant for eons was now fully awake, rising with a vengeance. "We're not making it to the habitat in time," Dave said, his voice hoarse. "It's too far, and the tremors are only getting worse. We're going to be swallowed whole if we don't figure something out." Alex looked at him, his mind racing. The rover's engine roared as Claire tried to push it forward, but the ground beneath them continued to shift, making the ride increasingly unstable. "We need to find shelter, anything," Alex said, his heart pounding. "Look for a cave or rock formation, something stable." The rover's tires skidded across the terrain, the vibration so intense that it was nearly impossible to keep the vehicle straight. They needed something to shield them from the eruption, and from whatever was causing it. And then, just as Alex was about to suggest another direction, they saw it. A massive, jagged cliff face loomed ahead, its dark silhouette stark against the raging dust storm. It was a natural formation, but something about it looked different, too precise, too deliberate. As the rover drew closer, Alex could make out the faint outline of an opening at the base, large enough for them to shelter inside. "Claire, that way!" Alex barked, pointing toward the cliff. Claire didn't hesitate. She slammed the rover's pedal to the metal, aiming for the opening. The vehicle lurched forward as the ground seemed to buckle beneath them once more. The dust storm around them thickened, and the roar of the eruption grew louder, filling the air with a constant, rumbling crescendo. As they neared the cliff, Alex caught a glimpse of something strange. The ground around the opening didn't look natural. There were smooth, almost perfectly symmetrical patterns etched into the rock face, as though someone, or something, had carved them into the surface. The designs were alien, and they filled Alex with an eerie sense of dread. Before he could ask about the strange markings, the rover's tires hit solid ground, and they pulled into the cave's entrance. The air inside the cave was cool and damp, a stark contrast to the heat and chaos they had just left behind. As Claire powered down the rover's engine, the shaking outside seemed to lessen, but the ominous rumbling still reverberated through the walls. Alex was the first to step out, scanning the dark, silent cavern around them. The walls were rough, but the markings on the rock, now visible in the dim light of their equipment, were unmistakable. Symbols, hieroglyphs, lines, and shapes that had no earthly explanation. "This isn't a natural cave," Claire muttered under her breath as she stepped beside him, her flashlight tracing the strange symbols. "This looks like it was made. By who?" Alex asked, a chill running down his spine. He didn't need an answer. The more he looked, the more unsettling the marks became. These weren't carvings made by ancient civilizations, nor were they the product of some random Martian erosion. They were deliberate and they were everywhere, carved into the stone, etched into the ceiling, even scattered across the floor. Suddenly, the rumbling from outside stopped. The silence that followed felt suffocating, the stillness oppressive. Alex couldn't shake the feeling that they had entered some kind of forbidden place. He turned to Claire and Dave. "We need to figure out what's going on. We need to understand what these symbols mean." Claire nodded, her face pale. "I agree, but we can't stay here for long. Whatever's causing the tremors, it's not over. We can't be sure that this cave will protect us." "Not just the tremors," Alex said quietly, his eyes scanning the markings on the walls. "Whatever made this cave, it was trying to tell us something. Or warn us." The team split up, examining the cave for any more clues. Dave took a flashlight and started exploring deeper into the cavern, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Claire stayed close to Alex, both of them studying the symbols as they made their way further into the cave. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, almost as if the markings themselves were alive, shifting in the dim light. The further they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It was like they were walking deeper into the belly of Mars, into something ancient and forgotten. And then, in the deepest recesses of the cave, Alex found it. A massive stone door, embedded in the rock, covered in the same symbols they had been seeing all along. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, a solid, immovable structure that seemed to hum with power, like a vault sealed shut by forces beyond their understanding. "That's it," Alex said, breathless. "This is it. This is what's been causing everything." Claire stepped forward cautiously, her hand brushing the stone. "What is it? What's behind this door?" Alex's mind raced. They had uncovered something old and incredibly powerful. And whatever it was, it had been locked away for a reason. "I don't know," he said, "but I think we're about to find out." Suddenly, the ground rumbled again. The tremors were back, stronger this time, more violent than before. Alex's stomach dropped. The vibrations were coming from the door itself. "It's not just Mars," Alex said, his voice filled with urgency. "Whatever's behind this door, it's the source. It's waking up." The stone door began to shift. A low, mechanical groan echoed through the cave as the massive slabs of rock slowly began to part, revealing a faint blue glow emanating from the cracks. The air around them began to hum, a frequency so deep and powerful it was almost tangible. Alex's heart pounded in his chest. Whatever lay behind this door wasn't just a relic of the past, it was a force that had been buried for millennia, waiting to break free. And now, it was coming. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?